Welcome to the Law and Licensing Committee, and on this cold winter day, we are happy to have you here. And this is the Law and Licensing Committee of the board, which is, I'm assuming, where you want it to be. My name is Carol Lear, and I'm the chair of the committee. And we usually have a quite informal opportunity for the public to participate. So if we don't get to you in a very specific way, make sure you let me know, or somebody else who's paying more attention, that you would like to speak, and we'll try and make that so, because we really want to be able to hear from you. And I really hate this. That's nobody's fault, but the whole setup of the room does not make that easy, so apologize for that. Let me have the committee members introduce themselves. Most of you know them, but just for formality's sake, and then we will get started with our first item. Cindy, you want to start?
Logged in. You say Cindy Davis.
You just have to push.
No, but I can't log into this because I'm logged into there.
Oh.
Log in as someone else.
Log in, just push the.
Or you could be 12, somebody who's not here.
Everybody's already logged in. I could trade Mike, but then Mike's going to have the same problem right here.
Which mic?
As opposed to this mic. Mike, introduce yourself, and then.
My name is Mike Haynes. I'm District 11, Southwest Salt Lake County and West Utah County.
Gonna go back to me. I'll be Brittany now. Okay. Laura's logged in here. I'm Cindy Davis, District 9, which is North Utah County, but hopefully make good decisions for all.
Brittany Cummins, District 6.
Yeah, please.
Angie Stallings, Deputy Superintendent of Policy and Staff for the committee.
Kathy Helgeson, Committee Secretary.
Thanks. We do have two time-certain items that we will wait to talk about, and I'm sorry that cuts both ways for some of you who would rather discuss it earlier, but this way we can let people come when they're able. The two items that we'll wait on are 277-306, the discussion about Educator Renewal licensing, and then R277-613, which is a discussion of our bullying rule that we've been working on, and that's at 3 p.m. and the licensing discussion is set for 2 p.m. So I'm hoping my helpful staff people will help me remember when we get to that point. So we get to start with a couple of easier items. We're starting with item 9.1, R277-419-4, which is a request from the American Leadership Academy for continuation of a waiver from that rule. So I would assume or imagine that the folks from ALA are here? No? Do you know? Anybody from ALA? Oh, are you from ALA?
I'm not.
Oh.
But I'm Gina James. I'm with the Utah Association of Public Charter Schools.
Okay.
And we just we're here for that.
Oh, okay, hang on a second. You'll get to say that a bit. Michelle, are you the one that's going to talk
I
about
have
that?
worked with them.
Oh, that'll be close enough. I think, yeah. You know more than I do then.
This is actually a continuation. They've been very compliant with the rule. Their original agreement was for 3 years to have a modified school schedule so that they could be on a 4-day week. They presented to us parent surveys and input, teacher survey, student survey, and so they provided information as requested by the rule that they had data that supported it. Their board approved it, And the charter school board also gave their approval to them making the application to the renewal.
Do you have any reservations?
I
on the
have no
material?
reservations. They have provided, even the few comments that were negative, they provided all of the information to show that the parents by far, and the students and the employees, they have some amazing programs on their Fridays as school options for students to attend as enrichment and makeup programs. So they aren't just doing a 4-day week, they actually use that 5th day as teacher prep and work together days, as planning days, as well as a 3-hour block for kids to have makeup and enrichment programs.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Michelle.
So-
That helps a ton. Michelle Buse is the Assistant Attorney General that works with our office, one of the two. So, board member ideas or questions or thoughts or concerns about the ALA request for a continuation of the waiver of the hour and day? It's just days. Any questions? Would anybody in the, and I'm thinking that's a no, and I have to make comments. Gina James, would you like to come up? Now you come forward. I'm trying to do this in a little more formal way, so thank you for indulging.
No problem. I'm Gina James with the Utah Association of Public Charter Schools, and we support this in the programs the ALA has. They have a great track record, so.
Great, thank you. That's helpful. It really is helpful, though, to hear from that. I'm thinking we've heard what we need to hear. Any other questions or motions? Brittany, Board Member Cummins.
I move that we approve American Leadership Academy's request for a continuation of a waiver from R277419, Section 4.
And the motion is that the committee approve the request from ALA for a waiver of R277-419-4, and everything we've heard supports that. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? I guess that's all of us. Thank you. And thanks for your comments. Item 9.2 is, yeah, I know, I'm trying to think. Oh, no, I misspoke, you guys. I misspoke. Not, yeah, you guys, I misspoke, and audience, I misspoke. I was thinking our time certain at 2 p.m. was about the discussion of this proposed license renewal rule. It's not. That's right now. The 2 p.m. discussion is about the school social workers who we've discussed before. So we have item 9.2, and the rule under discussion is R277-302, which is a new rule, and it has to do with license renewal for educators.
Just the rule.
Okay. Thank you. And Travis Rawlings who's the educator licensing coordinator, is here to help us. Thanks, Travis.
Thank you, Chair. What I just passed out, and there are a few copies for the audience, not necessarily all of them, was a summary document that I normally include with our new rules that I was not able to have finished until yesterday. So it is posted in board docs, but it wasn't posted till yesterday. So it is online if you need it, but I felt that I should give you a hard copy just in case, so you had it in front of you. So ultimately, this rule is related to the general licensing revisions we've been working on and is focused on the renewal of these licenses. As you're aware, associate, professional, and LEA specific in the new system, LEA specific renewals really kind of governed under 301. So this is really only talking about those associate licenses and the professional licenses. So one thing I need to make sure you're aware of, due to the timing of this rule, our normal process was not followed. We did not hold focus groups or send the rule out for comment early. I kind of explained that in the document a little bit, but ultimately it was bad timing with the rule, and we decided to try something different. So we put out a 6-minute video that described the general idea of what we were trying to accomplish, and put a link to a survey in that video. And we had a ton of response. We were very helpful districts and both UEA and AFT in distributing that video and survey. We had just unbelievable. Over 6,000 views on the video, over 3,600 responses to the survey. It was great. So the document itself, I'm not going to walk you through the document, the summary document, but ultimately, just so you're aware, the survey information is towards the end. And it appeared that there were 4 primary changes that we were proposing in these changes to the licensing renewal. And that was, number one, that, excuse me, that if someone has been working in a Utah school for their entire license, that they should have a simplified renewal process. LEAs provide professional learning for their teachers because they know that's best practice. It helps them make sure that they're on top of new reading research, things of that nature. So we wanted to create a simplified process for those people that are just working throughout their license. We also, due to that, we wanted to clarify that LEAs were required to provide 20 hours of professional learning to their licensed staff each year. As we've spoken with superintendents and charter schools both, that's actually probably less than they already provide in the vast majority of cases. There might be a few exceptions. But what it really is that we're not trying to encourage sit and get or anything like that, but the idea is the LEA, if they're working with a licensed educator, should be helping them maintain and improve their skills through high-quality professional learning, which is a different rule, by the way. We also had 2 other aspects that were the big change. Adding a category that talked about essentially what's done in professional learning communities, and that is reviewing student assessment data and using it to revise instruction and to plan instruction. And so that was number 3. And then number 4 was removing the points that were awarded for simply being employed in a particular position. Of all the changes, this was the one that had the most mixed, the only one that was clearly, everybody liked everything else. That one was the one that was very, very mixed. And I should say one more thing, reducing the total number of renewal points necessary, cutting it in half from 200 to 100. So ultimately what this rule does, I can walk you through the rule if you would like. However, I will just mention that associate licenses have very simplistic renewal requirements. That associate license, remember, is someone who's ready to start learning to be a teacher. And the only time you would renew that license is if you're not currently employed, like you haven't found your position yet. And so to renew it, we simply said, why don't you reiterate that you've met the requirements for the associate? Do you still have the test passed? Do you still have, you take the modules in case they've changed, things like that. But it's very, very simplistic. It's basically establishing that you still meet the requirements for an associate license. The bulk of this rule is talking about that professional license. That's someone who is a professional teacher. The one last thing I'll add is we did include a grandfathering provision, for lack of a better term, in Section 9. And it might seem overly complicated, but me and Ben went through this very carefully to try to make sure this was worded so we don't harm anyone, was really what we were trying to do. And that was basically saying if you were planning to renew under the old rules, and these new rules get thrown in, we still want you to be able to renew under those old rules. And so that's kind of what this whole provision is doing. And you can switch to the new rules if you want, if you choose to, but that way you have your options open. That way we don't harm anyone who gets caught in this transition. So it talks about that, again, that's the details, but the way we put dates in there and, before and after dates to limit it to people who, whose license started before the change and who expires, before 5 years later, essentially, so. With that, Madam Chair, I'm certainly open to any questions from the board, from the committee members or anything else I can help with.
And I have some questions, but let me see what the committee members have first. And then we also have a number of people who'd like to speak to this. So before we make any final decisions, I want to make sure we hear from them in our processing. So board members, questions. Brittany.
Thank you for working on this. This has been a long time coming through this process. Just a couple of questions. So I recognize that we cut the points in half, but prior to this, old renewals, like, so if you were in level 1, you only had to have 100 points, and a level 2 was 200. Correct me if I...
You are absolutely correct.
So just shake your head if I ever go down
Gotcha.
a wrong path. So as I read through this, it felt like some of the things that were removed and then some of the things that were added are in favor of that experienced teacher who is in a mentoring position rather than an early teacher who currently only has to earn 100 points, but is able to use some of their current practice to get points, who may not be given a mentoring role, a leadership role, and would rely more on points for education that they're receiving. And so I'm wondering if you could speak to kind of that concept, and do you feel like there's any disadvantage to those first few years in teaching under this new system?
I think that's a great question, Member Cummins. So when we think about the old system, when we had our level 1s and our level 2s, most level 1s didn't actually renew. They would actually upgrade. They would start working and they would upgrade. And we never really worried, if you will, about renewal points for upgrading. So yes, this is a new system where, okay, I graduate from college, I've met all my requirements for a professional license, I start teaching. And then I have to accumulate points just like my 30-year veteran down the hall, right? But at the same time, I would argue that there are aspects of this that are focused on leadership, but aspects that are not. So, for example, PLC time, professional learning from a district, are typically provided to all teachers. You can get extra points for being a mentor teacher. You can get extra points for certain things. But I think, particularly if they are employed, they'll be fine, as their LEA is required to provide them with this, minimum amount. Honestly, I don't think it'll be all that different than what they've been getting right now in their mentoring, in their I programs. It'll just, it'll be, someone will be looking at the points now. So that would be my opinion on that.
Can I ask a follow-up, Chair?
Sure, please.
Okay. So in that mentoring process, because that is professional learning, being a learner in a mentoring process, are they able to accumulate points kind of in that learning position rather than being in that leadership position?
I don't think it explicitly says that, no. I see what you're saying, but no, I don't think the current rule would really
Travis, can
lend
I
itself
help?
that. Absolutely.
Can I help you with that? I just was rereading this earlier, and here's the list of things. And as I look at it now in light of what you're asking, I think there are a number that fit in easily, because maybe we're perfect examples. I'm looking at it from a very old teacher's perspective. You're looking at it from a more newer teacher's perspective. So here are the list I had taken, kind of pulled out from the rule. University courses, USBE professional learning, LEA professional learning, and these are simplified, of course, student data analysis, education in collaboration with, sounds like pretty open-ended.
Yeah.
Alternative professional learning activities. I was going to ask you for an example of that, so hold that thought for a minute. Conferences, institutes, workshops, and then that went on, symposia, all kinds of things. And then self-development was included there too, I thought. Or maybe that's one I wanted to, no, that's one I wanted to ask about. Education, research, innovation with a product attached, and then mentoring in some kind of ed prep context. So I thought that there were a number that would satisfy younger or more earlier career teachers versus later career teachers.
Yeah.
Did you not see it that way?
No, I see what you're saying. The difference, however, though, is as a mentoring position is an assignment that you take on, you usually get a stipend for it. And so it is part of the job that you've taken on, and it's a valuable part of the system that isn't an opportunity for a teacher in their first several years. However, there's an immense amount of on-the-job learning and development going on as part of that process of being associated with that mentor. And it's not in a conference room, it's not in a university classroom, it's not in a symposium or working on a thesis statement or whatever, but it's really good learning that's taking place. And Could some of that fall under, I can't remember what it was called, alternative moments where that LEA decides that, yeah, I'm going to approve this learning opportunity? Because a good mentor would give you an assignment. I want you to really practice this skill in your classroom over the next couple of weeks, and then let's talk about it, right? And so that learner is taking on an assignment and really progressing forward. So my question is, it just goes back to that idea of what are those points that those early developing teachers could use as they seek for targeted development in their classroom, like real-time development in their classroom.
So just let me ask a clarifying question, then I want you to respond, if you would be so kind.
Absolutely.
To her question about alternative. So what you're saying is you feel like those teachers being mentored should earn credit just for being mentored?
I'll clarify, not just for being mentored, but fulfilling assignments given to them by their mentor. So it would almost be that there'd be a connection with their LEA head, so their administrator saying, okay, you have an assignment to be a mentor, so your points are obvious. It's very delineated in here. However, this person who's growing and developing, I mean, you can have a mentor and not learn anything. But some people really take that learning opportunity seriously. And is there some way that you can develop almost a personalized learning approach for that teacher that says, we're going to create an environment for you to learn something specific, and therefore, in essence, that it would count towards points earned.
So Travis, would you respond to that? And then also, and some examples of maybe the alternative learning
Absolutely.
activities.
So I think that I appreciate the clarification, because I feel like I understand what you're talking about now. And I think what you're describing could certainly fall under the third category, the LEA approved activity. Because for large, and to be honest with you, this is kind of easier in a large, more formalized setting. So like someone like Granite or Davis, their new teachers who are being mentored are also attending professional learning that their district has targeted specifically to them. Like their mentor, I'm aware of certain situations, this may have been a few years ago, but where the mentors and the mentees both would attend the same training, like when they had their professional learning days, and they'd be working together, in those kind of aspects. In a smaller district, I think that's harder to think about, but I think it would be allowed, but it's definitely not called out or encouraged in any way in the current wording of the rule. I think it would be allowed, but I don't think it's encouraged, would be my response. And then regarding the alternative activities, I have an old one from the last time we changed this rule. I've been around too long. But a good example was, so a middle school science teacher obtains a summer employment opportunity at the Natural History Museum. And they go there and they do field work, and they're able to accumulate some fossils and some things to enhance their instruction. And they can bring that back. And so the principal, who ultimately is the person who approves this, would say, oh yeah, you spent this time employed. What's a good amount of points to give for that? Where does it fit into this balance? And they can approve that under the alternative category. But it's something that is truly enhancing their skills, but doesn't fit into the rules. That's really the purpose of that category. If we'd like more than one, I'd have to think of another one.
And did you give, I'm sorry.
I only gave one. Do you want me to give another one?
Well, yeah, just give a couple
Okay.
more.
So, for example, let's see.
What about, would that travel one that I mentioned to you? Would that
Oh,
count?
yes. Okay. So, there are opportunities for teachers who work with some nonprofit organizations. Actually, our former director, Diana Sudworth, was talking to me about this before she retired, where they would send the teacher down to this other country for a week, and it was kind of like an exchange thing where they would work down there, they would engage in observing and teaching and working in this different setting, and then they bring those skills and knowledge back to their classroom. That would certainly fall under that other category.
And, oh, go ahead.
Thank you for allowing me to ask all these questions. Full disclosure, I am in the process of trying to earn enough points to renew my license.
Fair enough, fair enough.
So this has been on my mind a lot. And as you're talking about some of these alternate activities, one of the things that I think about is sometimes it feels like someone renewing their points has to buy these points. Like, how much does it cost to access university credit? How much does it cost to have these type of experiences outside? How much does it cost to find those PD things that can bring points? And so I guess my question, it comes back to that same question, although my first was specific to early teachers, but what can we do to help an educator find an authentic learning opportunity and to be able to have that approved by their LEA administrator and have that be accessible as a points, right? Here's a learning opportunity I have. It doesn't cost, it's not formal like a lot of conferences or things that cost money, but here's this learning opportunity I have. Can I count this for points? And is there a way that we could put that into the rule that allows it to occur so it's not so broad and vague that, I woke up and I was breathing this morning, how many points does that, get me? But really creating an authentic educational opportunity for an educator to find where they don't feel like I'm disadvantaged because of my years in service or disadvantaged because I don't have the money to pay for this cool excursion this summer.
May I respond, Madam Chair? Sure. So I think that you're going down a great path, because one of the things that always jumps into my mind is, okay, what you described would fit into the other category, but if we don't have something in their rule, it doesn't encourage people or help them think of that, right? I mean, like, for example, it's easy to find a university class, but it costs money. So are we encouraging them just to pay money? Are we feeding an economical model rather than saying, here's some other ways you can do that? Maybe you go volunteer in a science classroom to help run labs, because you're a science teacher, but you haven't been in the school for a long time, right? And so you want to go do something like that. And so I would obviously need some time to think through it, but I think that's something that we could look at. I think that I lost the other part of that thought, but yeah, I think we can do something.
So one thought is that one of the thoughts is that we might sort of expand this section with, one thought is we might expand this area or that has the laundry list of opportunities, and to maybe include some that are more that kind of inspire the ideas of the beginning teacher that don't cost money. I'll kind of state a bias, and I want to hear from the audience. Oh, we have some other discussion points. Sorry. Let's start with that, and then I'll go to my bias, and then we'll go to the audience. Go ahead. Cindy.
I was reading your email response to me. I had forwarded a letter. Someone wrote us a letter asking about for teachers who've kind of advanced in their career and maybe joining into policy-making types of activities now, or associations, or on a local school board, or what have you, where those activities would fit into this relicensing. And we have an example here, board member Cummins saying she's in the middle of relicensing. She, in her board leadership role here, or even just as a member, attends the Governor's Education Summit and learns there. She goes to the Capitol and works on policy with legislators. I just attended a new pedagogies for deeper learning with 500 principals and teachers. I mean, we do so many things. So in answer to this fellow's letter, I said to you, my first response is, of course, all those things fit in relicensure. Of course, you are working on education and bettering not only yourself, but the whole education community. Where would you see those fit in? And I apologize. Mm-hmm. That's when I look like a deer in the headlights when Chair Lear was saying, introduce yourself. And I just stared at her thinking, okay, I'm reading Travis's email. What did she just say? But could you share where you think those would fit in? And if they don't, if we think we need to include something like that here for those who grow into those types of experiences?
So I think that if you look on lines 223, This is actually the language from the old rule. Just so you know, this is the grandfathering clause, okay? This is the language from the old rule that talks about leadership role in some type of organization. On the one hand, what you've described would still be allowable within the other category. So I could say to my principal, hey, I got to attend this three-day conference and workshop is that seminar, whatever. Summit, thank you.
Education summit.
Yeah, I went to the Governor's Education Summit,
Yes.
right? And my principal can say, yeah, I think you should have some points for that. But again, like what Brittany described, it doesn't call that out or encourage it. So line 223 talks about that in the old rule, but you'll notice it was a maximum of 10 points per year. And when you think about what Brittany and Carol need to renew their licenses, that's not very much. So maybe it's a matter of bringing some of that language back, but leaving it a little bit more open. Or one of the things that Chair Lear mentioned that I thought was very interesting is, do we put something under the other category that's more descriptive, that provides guidance to someone like that, like what you were describing, you don't have to pay things? Or is it we tell the superintendent, you know what, superintendent, it's your job to provide that type of guidance in our documentation. Like, does that need to be in the rule, or does it need to be something that we need to direct the superintendent to make sure, the website needs to say, don't think you just have to pay for things. You can find these opportunities. I think there's a number of different ways to tackle that problem, and I see them similarly. And I think what we would want from you is, where do you feel most comfortable with that? Do you want everything in the rule? Do you want the guidance? How you want to proceed? And we'd be happy to do it.
Can I make one response to that?
Mm-hmm.
That just actually occurred to me. I can see that's possible, that you could have a principal, you could have a supervisor who was, and I always assumed that was the case, because when I had my license renewals was primarily when I was working at this office, and there was a deputy superintendent or somebody like that who was wide open and but he did help me. Several of them helped me. However, I recently talked to a friend who was renewing her license, and the principal she encountered was very controlling and very restrictive, and I had no idea that there would be principals like that who would not be as receptive to creative ideas or to using this category, this alternative professional development category broadly. So I think so this goes to my bias while I'm also responding to that, and that is what I'd like to do is take another month on this and maybe have the staff, have the staff try to find a better balance between a very prescriptive list and a wide open list, and include some of the things that we might hear about today. Cindy, what else were you going to say?
Do you want me to make a motion of that nature?
I'd like to hear from the people in the audience
Okay.
first. And Mike also had a question.
I just, kind of a comment and a question. I'm not an educator, and everybody else here is. And the thing that I hear and am most concerned with is figuring out a way to ever take away any kind of motivation from a teacher. I think that's critical, and especially as we talk about retaining and recruiting teachers, I'd like to see that kind of barrier. I mean, in this case that Chair Lear was just talking about, where a principal created a little bit of a barrier. I wanted to go back to a comment you made earlier, Travis, about the survey, that some of the feedback that you received. You mentioned that there were the largest category of those that had concerns. And can you tell me a little bit more about the input that you received from that group of people that had concerns? Again, Mike, you said out of all of these, I think you led with that.
So if you look on the front of the second page, I think, the bottom left is where we had asked the survey question, should we remove points for simply being employed in other, or being in certain positions? And that's where we had this drastic, 34% yes, 38% no, and big chunk in the middle. And so I think personally, I looked at it closely, it was poor survey design, because there's a whole big difference between, lowering points and taking away the points for just working, for those teachers, and lowering the points and taking away points from volunteering. Okay, so I think we lumped too many things in that basket, and that's why we got the mixed response that we did. If that helps.
So this was the only data collection point that you have? You had no further?
That was the only one that was in any way even mixed. Everything else was drastically approved. Yes, please do that, basically.
So I like what Chair Lear is suggesting. Maybe we take a little bit more time and look into this further to find out what it is in that area that causes the angst and concern.
Absolutely.
How to make that laundry list more helpful, more creative, but also broad enough that it provides for,
Absolutely.
encourages teachers as well. Board Member Davis.
I just wanted to thank you. We had talked a long time ago about, we were getting some letters from some folks in the public that were saying, can you make this process more simple? Can you cut down the hours? And you had said to me, it's my dream to cut the hours in half. And I just want any people in the public to listen that we hear you. Sometimes it takes some months to get it done through the process, but I just want to jump up on the table and shout that these hours have been cut in half, and thank you for doing the hard work and the heavy lifting on that. And I would echo what's been said here about going back and doing some of the things you suggested by maybe adding some things back in, like similar to line 223, and then, bringing some of that language back, but maybe leaving it a little bit more open in some ways too. I know this is all going to need to come into motion after we hear public comment. But also, if we had such mixed reviews on the employment, maybe it's not 100 points for being employed, but maybe we do put back in 10% of this or 20%, whatever, we feel is reasonable, so that teachers who are doing the job every day feel like this is something that's moving me toward a relicensure too, which would differentiate me maybe from someone who's not teaching every day and trying to keep up current on a license. But thanks for all of your work.
Absolutely.
Brittany, do you have another?
Yeah, just wrapping up, if I was to be asked, should we take away points for being employed, the easy part of me, the easy button says, no, don't take it away. But when you think about it, if we can get to that point where we're really talking about the ability for an employee to look at their competencies and growing, and we can encourage, really call out and encourage incentives to move and to grow within their employment, then I think that would be beneficial. Then it wouldn't matter if we had just being employed points, but you're employed, what are you doing within the boundaries of that employment with your administrator? So then as we talk about those growth opportunities, it's I'm growing, I'm learning, here's what I'm accomplishing. Then it's not just I'm awake, I'm here, stamping, but really looking for learning opportunities, and that those learning opportunities that they individually seek could receive the points that they're looking for.
That's good, well said. Cindy, you had a follow-up.
I don't disagree, but I would add that a teacher who's teaching in the classroom every day is growing more as an educator than a person who's
That's true.
at home working on relicensure. And
That's so true.
they could be given, certainly not the whole thing, but a portion.
So maybe we look at that
I
again,
thought.
too.
We'll take a look at
And
it.
one more thing, and then I know the folks in the audience will really add to our conversation. I just wanted to add, as I was talking to Travis about this, I compared relicensure, education relicensure, to continuing legal education, which I've also had to do almost the same on parallel tracks for almost 50 years. And when they didn't have continuing legal education when I started as an attorney, and when it was implemented by the bar to pay for a great and spacious building that's just a little bit down the street, then I was kind of resentful because I was a young attorney and I didn't have any money to pay for what were mostly expensive classes. But the lesson that the bar learned, that we're learning, I think, faster and with greater enlightenment now, 25 years later, it's a much broader range of activities. We still don't get credit for actually practicing law, but there are a range of activities that are there that the bar supervisors are much more open to. They Originally, it was a list of about 5 things, and they were all expensive. Now there are 30 things with another 20 that are free. And so I think the bar, and that's the only comparison I have, but they've learned the same lesson about, yes, encourage learning, but make it affordable so that it's encouraging and and resentment is not increased. So I think we can learn a lesson from that. I have 3 people who signed up to talk, and we would love to hear your additional ideas, and then we'll have a motion. Jennifer Bamey is first, if you want to come forward, and then Kathleen Cheshire, and then Ryan Anderson. And thank you so much for taking your time to help us understand this.
Here we go. My name is Jennifer Bamey. I am a 27-year educator with a current teaching license here in Utah. The changes to the number of points required for renewing a teaching license, utilizing collaboration as part of those points, and having a streamlined process for active educators are all great changes in the new proposed rule R277302. In my 3rd year of teaching, I was elected as a building representative for my local education association. Through monthly meetings and summer leadership trainings, I learned many leadership skills that I took back to school. I served as team leader for 18 years, as PLC leader for 5 years, on the school improvement committee, the staffing committee, the teacher representative on the district foundation, and on many other school and district level committees in the last 27 years. Some educators want to lead, but they do not have a desire to become an administrator. School districts need some teachers to be leaders in various capacities at the school level, team leader, department chair, building leadership teams. But school districts' professional development is focused on curriculum, classroom management, and collaboration. I was never offered any leadership training by my district. I learned leadership skills from my professional association, and those skills were utilized in the schools where I taught in my district. The rule that's proposed to be repealed, R277500, Section 5, and this has already been addressed by most of you, but the categories for acceptable activities for license renewal contains the following: service in a leadership role in a national, statewide, or LEA-recognized professional education organization. Under this rule, as a leader in my professional association, I could earn up to 10 points per year toward license renewal for the leadership training I received, as well as leadership I exhibited in the education profession. Education needs teacher leaders, and the best leadership training has come to me through our professional association. I also had concerns about the process of this rule being changed. The process to determine what categories would be acceptable activities for license renewal did not go through any public vetting before this rule was presented. The first time I saw it was in the video and then the accompanying survey. The video listed 3 categories that were going to be removed but did not narrate those, and there were no questions on the survey about which categories educators would like to see included or excluded in the new rule. As educators, we do not know whose opinion was used to remove leadership in a professional organization from counting it as an acceptable activity. So I would ask that in the new rule, that it includes service in a leadership role in a national, statewide, or LEA recognized professional education organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Kathleen.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Cheshire. I'm UniServe Director with Color Country UniServe, which is an arm of UEA. I represent educators in Washington, Iron, Kane, Beaver, Paiute, and Garfield counties. And I was an educator in Washington County for 24 years, and this is my 28th year. So I'm here today to express some concerns with the proposed changes for relicensing renewal and how those points can or can't be earned. I'm first curious about the survey you sent out to LEAs, asking them to forward the survey to their educators for input. Of the 6 school districts where I work with educators, when I asked some if they had seen the survey or not, none had. In the largest school district I work with, I asked the HR director just last Wednesday afternoon if he had seen the email asking it be sent out. And he looked at his email and said, oh, that's one I haven't gotten to yet. So he sent it the next day, thankfully. So those educators who didn't receive the survey, it wasn't until just last week. So I'm wondering, How many educators haven't seen it at all? Is this survey still open for input? Maybe there needs to be a more specific time to have more specific conversations with the rural educators as well to understand how your proposed changes will impact their opportunity for relicensure before decisions are made. Will the results be made available to see which groups responded as well as what geographic areas they're in and what their opinions were, and how will the results be used? There are definite differences and opportunities for educators to earn relicensure points depending on where they live and work geographically in Utah. Educators in rural districts don't have the same available opportunities as in larger districts. One teacher in Paiute told me she doesn't want to see the points eliminated from substitute teaching, volunteering, or being a paraprofessional because they have a hard time getting substitute teachers. And being able to earn points by substituting or by working as a paraprofessional or volunteer in the school is a needed opportunity for them to maintain their license, even when they're not wanting to teach full-time for whatever reason at that point. And for the educator who only teaches maybe 1 or 2 years in that 5-year period of their license. They need these opportunities for relicensure points to remain intact and not be eliminated. And then related to some of Jennifer's comments as far as eliminating the points for service in a leadership role in a professional organization, oftentimes those trainings and efforts provided to educators by the leaders in their professional organization are far more valuable than many times what the district offers. So for example, here's just a few of the training topics which leaders in local educator associations have worked to provide to educators. Training on updated and specific district policies and state rules to include legal responsibilities of educators, trauma-informed instruction, ESSA, TSSA, FERPA and HIPAA, evaluations and the Utah Effective Teaching Standards, advancing racial justice, managing conflict, secondary traumatic stress for educators, how to understand and mitigate the effects of that, bullying, as well as understanding workplace bullying, and the list goes on. Another example of an educator serving as a leader in her professional organization is a music teacher in Kanab, and she serves as the regional chair for music in the Utah High School Activities Association. Her time and efforts are all voluntary and unpaid. She puts in many hours each year planning and scheduling music festivals for the students with other region directors, arranging for adjudicators for the festivals, making sure the festivals are being run properly, making sure the judges are qualified, collecting all the paperwork necessary for the adjudicators, and submitting them to the state prior to deadlines, deals with grievances filed against adjudicators, and attends state and regional meetings throughout the year. Her workload is more intense in a rural area compared to the larger districts since there aren't as many music educators to involve, so you end up being in charge of arranging festivals for many more groups of student musicians in a larger geographical area, such as for regional ensembles, choirs, orchestras, strings, and solos. There are many other educational associations where leaders promote what is best to support students in Utah in just music alone, let alone other areas like, science and math and other subjects.
Kathleen, I don't want to cut you. I want you to be able to have your moment because you've come from Southern Utah. But we're convinced.
Okay. Just my last little comment, I just needed some clarification. With what you explained about the grandfathered section, if this creates, and maybe I'm not understanding right, if this creates two different systems of earning points, some who've had licenses up to this point and some new coming in, I feel like that will be confusing where some educators can count certain areas moving forward with points and some cannot. So, and is that what that grandfathered section sets up? So just a thought on that.
I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you for your time.
Ideas down. Thank
Okay, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chair Lear, committee members for this opportunity to speak. And thank you, Kathy, for your help yesterday in getting that one-pager out. I appreciate this opportunity and also the position in the speaking order. I think it might help with the upcoming motion that you may make. I'm Ryan Anderson. I'm a 40-year career educator. I started in Jordan School District and finished my career in Grand, Moab. And I am now currently Vice President of UEA Retired Teachers Association, We represent over 2,000 members in our local. As well-seasoned, experienced educators, we appreciate the work accomplished so far on R277302, and further applaud Travis's efforts to gather feedback from the survey sent out January 10th, and to further share what feedback you have so far today. We've seen so far, however, today, that this conversation could continue. I appreciate the discussion that you've had, the points that you brought up. So today, as retired educators and educators who are looking at relicensure, we're asking that you, in this committee, not pass this through today and give us some more time. Although 3,000 responses is a respectable sample of our 33,000 educators in the state, I think that, as we've seen today, we are in real-time process with this. The abbreviated timeline has been too short for serious consideration and discussion of something this big, this complex. Last night, I contacted our Grand County local school board president, our superintendent, our local association president, and our High Desert UniServe director, who has conversations and responsibilities over 10 locals in rural Utah. And everyone agreed very few people have a clue about what's going on with this in its totality. We have not had time or opportunity to discuss it and vet it through. And we would like that opportunity. Our 2,000 plus retirees have not yet been informed and had the opportunity to respond to these proposed changes. We did not see, as retirees, that email and that survey. And we'd like to get it out to our retirees. So from the synergistic question and discussion happening right here in this meeting, imagine what the scope of all of our licensed educators considering this relicensure and renewal and all of the possible personal permutations for consideration might be. It will require more time for further informed engagement, study, and dialogue, much like what has been happening in this meeting today, and I appreciate that. The synergy has been infectious. So thank you for your consideration, thank you for your time, and I look forward to working with you.
Just add, and then Cindy, I'd love to have you make a motion if you're still anxious or ready to do that, willing to do that. I want to mention that I also received an email from Curtis Benjamin, who's a UniServe director in northern Utah, who couldn't be here, who made some of the very excellent points that Kathleen, Ryan, Jennifer made, and gave some other excellent ideas for things that could be categories, and made the, I thought, very good point about we think of association leadership as UEA leadership. It's not only that. It is also, Jennifer mentioned, other kinds of leadership, and I think Kathleen did too. And Curtis mentioned he's been in leadership roles with not only academic content associations, but various other, even athletic associations that can strengthen his role as a teacher. So I wanted to add his comments because he was so thoughtful to send them. So with that, Board Member Davis, would you like to make a motion?
Trying to get all the wording figured out in my brain. I move that the committee send R277-302 Draft 1 back for an opportunity to bring some of the language back. Specifically, some of the language in line 223 surrounding leadership, some of the language looking at substituting volunteering and paraeducator experience, and trainings from associations, and provide an opportunity for some additional input from some subgroups like our retired educators.
Motion is that the rule go back to staff for a little more discussion and work, as we've heard today, including some additional categories under the license renewal opportunities, and I won't repeat all of those, and any others that you see fit, and additional cooperation, collaboration with the very interested educators who've made time to come today and given us some good ideas to think about. So I'm trusting that you were here and you heard the same conversation we did, and that will be so. So with that, that's the motion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. It was unanimous. Thank you, Travis. We'll expect it in the next month if that's possible, or as the next if it's not. So thank you, and thank you so much for the thoughtful comments that we received from educators. That was really helpful. Reinforced some of the things that I think some of us were thinking. The next item on the agenda was actually the repeal of the rule that was in place, that this would have replaced R277-500, so we'll delay that until we have this, we have a return visit to this rule. With that, we have a time certain at 2 o'clock to talk about, on number 4, item number 4, talk about R277-306, educator preparation programs for school psychologists, audiologists, speech language pathologists, speech language technicians, counselors, and social workers. And we have a draft 1 still to look at on that. Is that right? And that's also you, Travis. So with that, we've had discussion for several months about this, so let's hear where we are now, please.
Absolutely. Thank you, Madam Chair. After the previous board meeting, staff was directed to propose amendments, revisions to this rule to include the provisions for a school social worker license. Before I get into that, I wanted to say some thank yous on the record, if that's all right. I could not have done this by myself. I had help from Andrea Miller with Granite School District, Wayne Trice from Canyon School District, BJ Weller from Canyon School District, Christopher Bringhurst from Provo School District, Tammy Zundel from Provo School District, and Richard Landward with the University of Utah. I could not have done this without them. They were very flexible. We had to turn this around very quickly. I was very impressed with the support they gave me. I was very appreciative. And so what we've done, if you'll scroll down to line 125, we've added a new section specifically for school social worker preparation programs. And what we've done is we've detailed what it takes for a program to be approved to recommend for license. Right now, the only school social worker program in the state is at University of Utah and Utah State University. Quite frankly, they will meet all of these criteria. That's not within question. But what we've done is we've done what the board has been trying to do with this entire system, and that is remove requirements like hours, remove requirements that are arbitrary, and trying to put them more in the competency standpoint. So that's what we've done. And so if you'd like to go through those competencies, that's the bulk of this section of the rule. But then, starting on line 167, is where it talks about an alternative way to become a school social worker. 167 talks about that if you have a CSW or LCSW license from the Division of Occupational Professional Licensing, or DOPL, you can receive the associate educator license with the background check and those kinds of things that are typical. The last section, line 175, requires the superintendent to work with our universities and our LEAs to create a preparation program that is non-degree professional license preparation to become a school social worker. Specifically, those individuals in subsection 2, those people who are already CSWs or LCSWs. So this is not about someone comes in off the street and wants to be a school social worker. That's not what this program would be. The program that we'll need to create will be someone who is a clinical social worker or a licensed clinical social worker, and they want to start working in a school. And they'll have this as an opportunity. One of the changes you made to R277-309 was to clarify that to be a school social worker, you don't necessarily have to have this license. You can practice simply on your DOPL license in a school. But this is an option if the school district, the individual, if any of them desire to go down this path, it's available to them, but it's not required. So with that, that will end my presentation, Madam Chair.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry, that was fast.
Thank you, Travis. Any questions from?
So in the top portion where it's setting up the program, it's a master's degree on top of a social working bachelor's degree. Is that correct? The program requirements?
Yes, a school social worker program or clinical social worker program through DOPL requires a master's degree.
Okay.
A bachelor's in social work would be insufficient.
So when we're talking about getting an educator license on top of a clinical social worker license, just a DOPL certified clinical social worker or social worker, is that just a bachelor's degree or is that also a master's degree?
That is also a master's degree. At least that's my understanding. Andrea is probably here. She could answer better than I.
And then Board Member Davis.
I think I gave some schools in our rural areas the wrong information. But I just want to check my understanding. I think, Ben, can I address Ben? Ben, I emailed you and asked, can a person practice social work in the state of Utah without a DOPL license? In anywhere, in a school, in a clinic, anywhere? And your answer was no.
No.
So any person working in social work in our schools has to have a master's degree and a DOPL license.
If a master's is required for DOPL license, that would be yes.
Is that as a master's required?
Yes. Oh, please come up if you can. Okay. Tell us who you are.
Thanks,
and then
Andrea.
We would welcome your expertise.
Andrea Miller, Granite School District, social work, school social work coordinator.
So our rural schools are struggling getting people that have a master's already and a DOPL license. Can they hire someone with a bachelor's degree in social work on like an associate's type of license during or an ARL type of a thing during those 3 years? They'll get their master's and DOPL license and then become a professional social work school social worker or just even social worker in the schools. Is that something that we are saying is okay to meet this need?
So I don't think that is the board's call, because DOPL.
That's what I'm wondering.
DOPL has specific statutes that if you are doing work within an area that DOPL regulates, you have to have the DOPL license. So unless DOPL had that kind of program, they wouldn't be able to do that.
I did learn from my new friends that helped me that there is an intern clinical social worker license, but that is typically someone who's finishing up their master's. So what you're describing does not exist to my knowledge and would have to be created by DOPL.
They do have BSWs who will sometimes work in a school, but not at a clinical license, and their jobs will be more of resource gathering and some work with the community to provide clothing and do some of those kinds of outreach work, but it's not a school social worker per se.
So can I speak again, Chair? So they can hire a person with a bachelor's degree in
I don't
social
know
work
how they hire that. I don't know how they label that
to
to
do
be hired.
some responsibilities, but not
It would
all?
fall under what districts typically refer to as classified employees, meaning non-licensed employees. If they wanted to hire them to do something, their tasks would fall not under the clinical social worker
Correct.
tasks. It would be basically, I hate to say this, but if they have a bachelor's of social work or they have a bachelor's of English, they can do the same thing. They may not have the skills, but legally, there's no difference from Doppel's point of view.
But the bachelor's in English can be hired on an associate license at a
Correct.
full professional salary, and the bachelor of social worker can't,
You are correct. Because
according to
Doppel. So we control the teacher license. The social work license, Doppel doesn't govern teachers at all, but they do govern social workers.
Can I ask one more follow-up?
Sure, please.
If the district defined the responsibilities and chose to hire that as a professionally paid license, not license, sorry, I can't use the word license, but a
Employee.
professionally paid position, could they do that?
What they would
If the
have to
definition
do,
didn't fall.
if they have the definition of the position, they would need to check with Doppel to determine if that falls within the scope of practice of a school social worker.
Okay.
And if it doesn't, then they'd be fine.
I hope I can summarize all that back to our folks, because our rural folks are really struggling with this, and they need some
Hadn't thought of
direction.
that. I didn't realize it was a master's degree.
It is a
At
master's.
minimum. Let me ask a follow-up question to Cindy's question. So then, what you're telling us is there's no, well, I have two parts to this. There's no bachelor's social work degree.
There is a degree, but not a license.
But it's not a license that.
That is
and-
with Doppel.
And, okay, there's not a licensed Doppel position.
Yeah.
So
with that.
there is an, I believe, and I don't want to be quoted on this, but there is another social work, there is a social work certificate that is given at the BSW level, but it's not a licensed one.
So the people at risk, or the risk would not be, Cindy, this is kind of to your question. I don't think the risk would be to the school. The risk would be to the individual who's practicing social work without the appropriate license.
If they were practicing outside of
If he
their.
was doing what.
Outside of
he
the
was-
scope of what they've been trained to do.
Right, of what he's allowed to do without being the LCSW. So that's maybe helpful information for the rural people you're talking to, Cindy, too. One question I had that's, or not really a question, this is more for Travis. You can stay there, though. You're helpful. You can stay. Is that I think it would be helpful in this rule. First of all, I don't see any definition of CSW or LCSW
Oh,
in the
Okay.
rule.
That would be an
And so to
oversight.
put that either in parentheses or if it's used many, many times in the definitions.
Absolutely.
That'd be helpful. I'm wondering also if there's some way in the rule to put the description that we just verbalized for those in the field, so that those in the field could have an understanding of this social work degree allows the person to do this. LCSW allows this. LCSW allows this. I may be saying them wrong, but is that possible?
I would caution you, obviously, we can do what you need. I would caution you that the purpose of this rule is to clearly state to our universities and preparation programs that prepare these individuals for what the requirements they are to have to make. Guidance to LEAs about those type of legally touchy issues, while that's a resource the state board often helps with and, providing guidance and things of that nature, I don't think it fits
Maybe
within
it's
this
not
rule
appropriate for our
personally.
rule. That's a good point. Thank you.
So,
Good
and
reminder.
it's called a SSW, a social
Okay.
service worker.
Okay.
That's at the
At the
bachelor's
bachelor's
level.
level.
And many of them work in DCFS,
Okay, that makes sense.
SSW.
Thank you. That's really helpful, and thank you for that reminder, Travis.
They could work as anything that they can do in DCFS, they could do in the schools too, because it's what's governed by DOPL. But what a clinical social worker does is not what they're doing. It's not the same thing.
So our schools, our school social workers are working at a level that's already a master's level. So they've already had to do their schooling at that level. If you go to, and you're an SSW, that means you've done your bachelor's and have gone to work for the social service agencies. So you'll do casework, case management, resource gathering. Those types of things are what's given under that. And I do believe that those types of things have to be defined by the agency that hires them and picks them up.
Interesting. Okay. Other questions? Mike? No. Board Member Cummins?
Can I make a motion?
Public comment.
Or do we have public?
No, I don't have public comment. We don't have anybody who signed up, but I want to see if there's any public comment. But I'm just trying to process this and see. Let me just say one more thing, and then we'll have public comment, because I want to make sure my understanding is correct. So what we've now done with this rule is created, with considerable help, is laid out what a university program has to do, or the elements of a university-approved program. And then we've also explained that an LEA may require both licenses, an educator license and a social work license.
So that was done last month. in
Okay, 309. Okay. And this essentially then just lays out the components for the program for the
program.
university,
And then this alternative that the
and
superintendent.
lays out the alternative that the school can, or an LEA can provide. Okay, I wanted to make, so that helps me. I was kind of going the 309 route. Board Member Cummins.
Just to clarify a statement you just made, that an LEA may require an educator license, or did it give they may offer, they may allow, or they can hire, did it?
The exact wording was that an individual working as a school social worker in an LEA need not have a school social worker license.
And what
Because
I-
everything else is under DOPL.
And what I was what I was trying to convey was that that Granite School District, for instance, can say, we will
Yes.
only hire.
That is correct.
These people with these licenses.
Yep.
Which they could have done anyway without our rules. So maybe it was made clear in the rules, I'm not sure. With that, is there anybody in the audience who'd like to speak to this version of the rule? I know we've had lots of comments in other meetings, so maybe we've said our piece. So thank you. Thank you for being here anyway. And with that, are you ready now we're ready for a motion. Brittany?
I move that we approve R277306 Draft 1 on first reading with the parentheses helping us know what CSW, LCSW mean, on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
And thank you. The motion is for the committee to approve R277-306 on first reading with the amendments as described, which would be any kind of clarification of definitions that are necessary, and forward it to the board for approval, second and final reading. All in favor? Aye. Thank you. I guess we finally got a rule
Thank
that
you.
is satisfactory.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for all the work. The next item on the agenda. R277-750. This is a discussion issue, not an action item. So listen with lighter hearts. So Associate Superintendent.
Not so light.
No, and heavier every day. This will be an updated state board to establish established miscellaneous, exactly what the rule says.
Thank you for having me. Okay, this is a little complicated, which is why we have it on the agenda, which is one of the two reasons we have it on the agenda for discussion first. Okay, so the actual rule is short and sweet, and Ben has updated the actual rule because for two purposes. One, the code related to programs for students with disabilities was updated in the 2019 legislative session, so the board has to update their rule. The complicating factor is that this manual, which we call the rules, is incorporated by reference into 750. This 280 pages of rule. So we had already needed to make some amendments to these rules, and then the legislature told us we needed to update 750, and then as a result of some monitoring issues that have come up specifically related to fiscal, to use of state and federal special education funds in the last year and a half, we felt it was necessary to update the entire section, which is section 10, of the rules, special ed rules, to make it very clear how restricted state special education funds, restricted federal special education funds could be used. So we did put together a work group of, yes, did you find it? Section 10, funding.
Under funding.
Yes, 197.
All right, thanks.
Okay, and just as an FYI, the online version that if you went to our website and clicked, the page numbers are a little bit different than the printed copy, but the table of contents helps you navigate. But anyway, so this is the current version, and I present it to you because the version that we are proposing in Civic Clerk has so many crossouts and so much addition, moving things around to make it simpler to follow, and then some substantive issues, which I'll go through with you. It's really difficult to look at.
So let me very first part of this. So these are just the special ed rules that currently exist.
This is current. This is current.
One I know.
So you have baseline.
Okay.
This is the baseline. Okay. And what you have in Civic Clerk is the proposal.
The proposed, with the showing the red line and all that stuff.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you.
But there's a lot of it.
Yeah.
And so it's complicated to look at.
And there's no written version of that or paper version of that, I would presume.
We didn't print that because it is literally 280 pages.
Okay. Sure, Cindy.
Are all of those changes on Civic Clerk, did they all come from code changes?
No.
No.
Okay.
No.
Are you going to explain where they just come from? Okay. Is that okay? Okay.
Okay. So there's the threefold reason for updating the rules. One, because of the change to code, which created almost no substantive changes in the rules. Okay. The second issue is just in the last few years, in our monitoring with LEAs, we identified places that the rules could be clarified. And we have updated the rules every 3 or 4 years since 2006 when we originally wrote them for that purpose. We spend time with LEAs, we review files, we review programs, we recognize, oh, this could be clearer, let's clarify that. Third reason is because of the fiscal monitoring that we've been doing in the last year and a half and recognizing that, that we have not been clear enough for LEAs to understand how to use restricted state and federal funds. So Section 10 is largely new. There is a little of it. The part about federal fiscal accountability is the same, but we've added an entirely new section, more than 30 pages, about state special education funding. So if you'll notice in Civic Clerk, to make it simpler for you to follow, and us to follow, to be honest. I took section 10 out, and it's a separate attachment. So the baseline and all the proposals to all the other sections are in the one attachment. And then the section 10 is its own attachment, which is the fiscal. And it talks about where state and federal accountability for restricted funds are the same and if there are any differences. Okay, so if you go to the handout about the handout in Civic Clerk that gives you the 5 places where there are substantive changes.
Okay, if I'm looking down.
Right one, Leah, look at.
Yes.
And which one is that in our list?
It's the very bottom one.
The very bottom one.
think.
Board of Education
No.
Special Rules Manual, no, that's, 2020, no? Section 10?
No, not section 10. It's
Click on
the,
that bottom one. It might be the right one.
Yes, it is the very bottom one.
yeah, it was the last one I added,
All
so
right,
that makes
thank
sense.
you.
Okay, so here are the 5 large substantive changes, okay? And let me go back, one thing. The other reason why this is a discussion item, obviously there's a lot of changes. We want to give you a lot of time to really look at it. But we also are taking these proposed changes to the Special Education Advisory Panel next month and the Special Education Directors next month so that they have an opportunity to provide more feedback. They served on the task force that created the proposed changes, their representatives, but the entire group, we want to give them an opportunity to review the updates, provide more feedback. So that's the twofold reason why it's a discussion item. It's a lot, and we want to get more feedback from LEAs and stakeholders, okay? Okay, so just quickly, I'll go through these five changes, okay? So like I said, Section 10 significantly altered. Okay, so in Section 10 currently, we have a wonderful chart about how you can use state funds. Different ways that state funds, if they're allowable, if they're not allowable, or if they're possibly allowable with USBE permission. Okay, there's several pages of cost allowability. Okay, we have added a version of this chart that is specific to state funds. So, and the reason that we've added a new chart is so that LEAs would have access to the function codes in our chart of accounts. So they can follow very simply and easily the funding source, what they would want to spend the money on, look in our chart and see if that's an allowable cost or not. And if it might be an allowable cost, but they have to get permission from us first, then they can know to contact us. Just like we currently have federally, now we've got another one in the proposed for state. That's going to be hugely useful to LEAs and hopefully decrease some angst and really clarify how restricted state funds can be spent. Okay? Another thing that we added in Section 10, we've made a chart about the documentation to make it very clear, black and white, the types of documentation that we might request when we come on a fiscal monitoring visit. So that did not exist previously. We did talk about fiscal monitoring in the current version. Now we've added a chart that says, these are the things we're going to be looking for, and here are the records that you would use to demonstrate them for us. And Angie's got that up. Okay.
Thank you.
So that's just an addition to be able to support LEAs in understanding what it is that we're going to be reviewing when we're monitoring. Okay.
And we're still in the first of 5, though.
Yes, we're still in bullet number 1. This
Okay.
is Section 10. Okay.
Okay.
These are the additions to Section 10. Okay. The next thing, we've added a chart about time and effort documentation and exactly how exactly the requirements for time and effort documentation, which means, if you're not familiar with that vernacular and that requirement, an individual who is paid with federal restricted funds has to be able to demonstrate the amount of time that they work in that program, and then only be paid with that program's funds for that percentage of time. And so we've made it very clear how an LEA would demonstrate for us that person is working in this program, in the federal program, but we are also now requiring in this rule that the LEA document for us if the person is being paid with state special education funds, the percentage of time that they would be paid with state restricted special education funds. And it's very clear now that that's a requirement. The current rules intimate that. The proposed rules puts it in black and white. Okay? Come back. So that's the first bullet. Okay? Okay, so bullet number 2 is what we've already talked about. Made sure that the rule and the code, so because all of education code was updated last year, we went through all of the rules, made sure all the citations were now accurate. Okay? So all of those citations to code, to state code, and we checked all the federal citations as well to make sure that none of them, that they all made sense. We've updated all the citations.
Bless your
And notated that. That was an enormous amount of work, notated that.
Yes.
And Cole and Neil did section 10, just for your information. This has taken us about 9 months. We've been working on this since the end of the previous legislative session. So, okay, the third bullet. So, Anita also did this. So the current version of the rules talks about when an LEA needs to get parent consent, all the way through the document. So every time it talks about something related to special education, if there's a parent consent requirement related, it talks about parent consent there. That was confusing to some LEAs. So we've taken all of the consent requirements and put them together. There aren't any changes at all to the consent requirements, but the formatting is very different. So now they're all together. So if an LEA has a question, do I have to get parent consent for this? It's there.
Yeah,
it's all together. Okay?
Perfect.
Okay, so the next one. The fourth bullet is related to the identification of students with specific learning disabilities. So the baseline rules sunsetted, is that a word? Mm-hmm. Made sunset? Sunsetted.
It's not sunset. So.
Yes. My mother, the English teacher, says if you can spell it and you can define it, it's a word. So, a la Shakespeare.
Yeah.
So, one of the methods, so we had 3 methods for determining if a student was eligible for special education under the disability classification of specific learning disability. In the baseline rules, one of those methods sunsetted this past summer. So this new version adds another option, another method. So this section, Kim Fratto and a group of LEAs have put this together, and they've been working on this actually for almost 3 years because we knew the sunset was coming, and so we'd been working on that already, and that was one of the reasons that we needed to update the rules anyway, having nothing to do with the statute being updated, because that was already coming. So that's the fourth major change, and then the fifth major change is also as a result of state law, and it's just a really good idea. We updated the terminology for services for individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing. In the Federal Register and in the baseline rules, the disability classification is hearing impaired and deaf, and hearing impaired is not a term that is used anymore. It's not very person-centered. Hard of hearing is the term, and the state law actually updated that 2 legislative sessions ago. So we knew that was a change that also needed to be made. So we've made that change. So those are the substantive changes. But there are, when you look at the rules, there's cut and paste and copy all of it. It looks a lot scarier than it is. The major difference is Section 10, and Section 10 is very different.
Questions? Board member comments?
I have 3 questions.
Yes.
Question 1, the use of the airplane, does that mean trips to Hawaii are allowable costs under this? No, I'm just kidding. No, question 2,
Just 2.
is when you're talking about having to have documentation for the use of federal funds and the use of state funds. I was in a task force once with Dr. Estrada, and she talked a lot about braiding funds. And so I'm just curious, without reading it, if that concept of using, funds from different sources for a specific purpose is honored or somehow made easy through this process of having to show documentation for different funds that are used for special education?
That's a fantastic question. I do think it is honored. I don't necessarily think it's made easy. I don't think it's more complicated, however. I think it's kind of status quo, because currently you have to, it may be a little more difficult. If a person currently is paid with a percentage of federal special education funds, they have to fill out a time and effort certification. And whatever percentage of time they're paid with whatever funding source, the LEA's financial system has to track that, right? Because you still have to tell us, if you're using restricted funds, where it's coming from. So the increase, or the new thing that would be, is that if you are only being paid, because if you're currently being paid with federal and some state, you're already doing that. You're already filling it out, right? But now, if you're only being paid with state funds, you would fill it out where previously you might not. However, the LEA is still tracking that. You just are not, and I actually brought one to show you.
But if,
I have an exhibit.
While you're pulling that out, are you saying that, is it the LEA's responsibility to do that, or is it the individual's responsibility to do
The LEA is responsible. The individual fills it out, and I brought one to show you.
Okay.
Okay, so my staff, we are paid with restricted funds, and so we all fill these out. And part of my salary is federal, part of my salary is state, and I have to fill out the percentages. So it would be no different for me, but it would be different for someone who is only paid with state funds, because currently they wouldn't necessarily be filling one out. They might be in some LEAs, but the LEA is still tracking it either way.
Go ahead.
So my question is just to the process and the format of this, just if you could speak to why it's in manual format and why we don't have them in our normal rules format. And are they still readily available? Because all the other administrative rules are on the administrative rules site. If they're there, can they easily access these particular rules? And do the same requests for hearing apply to this manual, et cetera, as we move forward with this process?
Yes.
You want me to answer?
Yeah, Angie, do you want to?
Yes. Yes to all of those questions. We hope it's easy for people to find, as easy as it would be to find the rule. So under the Administrative Rules Act, as well as the rule writing guidelines that the Office of Administrative Rules hands out, you can incorporate by reference a document or a manual. And we have quite a few examples of documents that we incorporate right by reference. There's the Testing Administration Manual, for example, in for assessment. This is probably the largest manual we have that we incorporate by reference. But if somebody from the public wanted to find this manual and they were like, what rules, if I want to know about special education, where do I go? So they would go, and this is our website right now, and I imagine it looks the same on the Office of Administrative Rules website as well. But whenever the board's ready to approve this rule, we would approve the rule in the same way that you approve every other rule. And when we file that rule with the Office of Administrative Rules, we will also file a copy of this manual with the rule. And we are required under the rulemaking guidelines to include a link to the manual in the rule. So now this is our current 750. It's on our website. And so then you go into the rule and it's taking you to our website in lieu of just doing a PDF of the document, but the document's right there. So this is the document that's incorporated by reference. And I think our office decided to do it the way I just showed you in lieu of just the PDF, because the PDF has changed, either because things get updated.
It's because of 508 compliance. Because there's so that a screen reader for an individual who is blind or visually impaired can read it. That's why the written copy is a little bit different than the online version. So that the online version, an individual who is blind or visually impaired could have a screen reader read it to them.
So does that answer your question about the process? And so, yes, as 750 gets approved by the board and is filed with the Office of Administrative Rules, if anyone wanted to provide public comment or request a public hearing, they could do that in the same manner as if this were a 280-page rule.
Yeah. And I think it's important to point out, too, to add to that this manual is every bit as much a rule and enforceable as any rule we have. Every piece and word and provision in the manual, which makes it incumbent upon
Complaint investigators and hearing officers use this.
But it makes it important for the board to understand what these rules say, because there are also our literal rules. So thank you. Yes, thanks for that clarification. Other questions? Michael?
Thank you. Wow, Leah, this is complex. And, I'm glad that you're an expert on this and that we have a resource like you to turn to.
Those of us that are really like these rules.
Wow. So I've got some experience working with physicians, and they if they don't code things correctly, they lose on their income. And many of them just say, well, just roll with it. And then they end up hiring people to come in and manage just the medical billing portion of that to ensure that the coding is, accurate. So I started thinking about all of this, the coding requirements, and you said it's pretty simplistic, but what is our compliance across the state? Do you know how often our schools are
Out of compliance?
The accuracy of all of that for federal funding? Are we pretty high? I mean, I'm sure you don't know an exact percentage, but are we pretty good at that? Is there any?
I'm going to give you a multifaceted answer.
Okay.
But as simply and as briefly as I can. So we monitor all LEAs programmatically and fiscally. Okay. And monitoring includes looking at actual IEP files. Okay. Programmatic monitoring looks at IEP files. There are hundreds of nitpicky things that can be right or wrong in an IEP file. And this is my 17th year, I think, doing special education compliance. In my 17 years, I have reviewed one perfect file.
Okay.
And I can tell you the teacher's name.
Wow. Because
I have reviewed one perfect file, and I memorized her name. Okay. So file compliance is complicated because there are hundreds of things that have to be accurate. But the key is that the team followed the linear process that leads them to make a good decision in order for a student to receive a free, appropriate public education. So if the file has issues, but the student is receiving services and supports that help the student access and make progress in the general curriculum, yeah, that's an error, but it's not keeping the student from receiving free appropriate public education. We call that a procedural violation versus a substantive violation, okay? Every single time we monitor, we find procedural violations. We don't frequently find substantive violations. There's a process for parents and for any stakeholder to file a complaint. If any of us felt like a student or a group of students was not receiving a free appropriate public education, we could file a complaint, have our complaint investigated, and if that student was not receiving the services and supports that he or she needed, the complaint investigator would require that LEA provide compensatory services to make up for it. So we have processes in place, our monitoring process and the complaint process, to be able to ensure that those substantive violations don't happen very frequently and are accounted for. Utah has a very low percentage of complaints. So,
But getting
so
greater,
that part's good.
but growing.
It is growing. So that's the part 2 of my response would be it has been increasing. And then the part 3 of the response is we do fiscal monitoring. And our fiscal monitoring, as you have all spent time reviewing in the last year, has demonstrated that there are some misunderstandings of the requirements to use and account for restricted dollars. And so one of the proactive things that we are doing to be able to help LEAs through that process is putting it all in black and white. Right. So it's right up there up front. They can just follow, this is what we have to do, this is what we can't do, this is what we might be able to do, but we need to talk to USBE before we do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Does that respond to your question simply but adequately?
Wow. No, you cleared up some concerns, certainly. Appreciate that. And kudos to keeping that updated and maintained. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Other questions?
So just
did you finish that? Sorry.
I
Go ahead.
did, but then it occurred to me. So our plan was we'll take this to stakeholders next month. We'll bring it back to you in your March meeting as an actual action item.
Okay. And just as a kind of a more practical question, will you eventually publish any of these?
Yep.
Even though a lot of people prefer it online?
Yes, and I'll tell you
love
why.
the manuals.
Yes, and I do too. I didn't bring mine, but I actually showed it at the Special Ed Law Conference this summer. and
it's
Chair
pretty ratty.
Chair Lear was there. It no longer has a cover. It has all sorts of tabs all the way through it. It's got tape everywhere because, and Nate's is probably uglier than mine, but yes, we will print them because people find making their own little notes to remind themselves of things helpful. But I also personally love the online version because I can just do a control find, and sometimes it's actually quicker to find what I'm looking for unless I know a lot of the page numbers. So that's gonna be difficult for my 50-year-old brain is to relearn page numbers when we republish. But yeah, we will publish.
Yeah, thank you. Mine's a lot more, I aspire to have one that looks like Nate's and Leah's. Mine is not that beaten up yet. Go ahead, Cindy.
So is the plan then to disseminate this at the summer law?
Yeah. Actually,
conference this summer?
our plan is Nate and I, and probably Jordan, who's our new staff member that you met a couple months ago, and Neil and Cole, our fiscal monitors, we will probably do a state tour and spend 4 or 5 hours in different parts of the state walking people through the substantive changes, anybody who shows up. So our plan is kind of twofold, the Summer Institute and then go to people for people who can't come.
That's great. Thank you for doing that so much. Thank you. Other comments from the board members? is there anybody in the audience who wants to speak to this? You'll have a couple of more chances, it sounds like, or many more. But is there anybody who wants to speak to this now? It doesn't look like it. Thank you, Leah. That was so concise for a very complicated issue, so thanks.
You are so welcome, and I just, most of the staff, not all of them, who've been working on this for the
Right.
last 9 months are behind me, and
Yes.
it's been an enormous amount of work,
It
so
is.
they're pretty incredible.
But so, for practitioners, it's so helpful. And I thank you personally as well as in this capacity. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So thank you, and that's perfect timing. Well, a little early. Let's look at item 9.5. Oops. Let's look at item 9.5. R277, no, that's one we just did. Item 9.6, which is an action item on R277-708, an enhancement for at-risk students. And Brian Olmsted is here to help us. If we go to that rule. Mr. Olmsted?
So the substantive changes in this rule are to allow us to continue statewide, basically a pilot program. Some of you might remember about 2 years ago, this would be line 22 that is now struck. We added 23 where we allowed LEAs to create a local definition of students at risk of academic failure. It's been received well. About a third of the LEAs have opted to do that. And as the assessment climate and setting has changed repeatedly, it's time now to break this from the tie to assessments. That's what we feel like. So our proposal is to remove that section and allow, I guess not allow, but have every LEA create a local definition of at risk of academic failure and then use these funds to serve that targeted population. And so that's mainly the reason for the change, and it required a few edits throughout the rule.
Can I ask a sort of a more
Big
umbrella
picture?
type
Yeah.
question?
Yes.
And that is, so, and this is one I had when I first read the rule and saw it on the agenda, but, so the purpose of having the LEA, having a definition of, and I forget now, at risk.
At risk of academic failure.
At risk is for purposes of what kind of programs? Or is it, or what specific funding?
So if we go back to the original, we call this EARS, Enhancement for At-Risk Students.
Okay.
It was to address students who were below proficient on assessments. And so the type of program that you would design would be help to then, plus up either tutoring, additional instruction, whatever. And so, so by allowing the local definition to look outside and be beyond the assessment range, we can now address issues that get to the heart of other reasons why a student would be at risk of academic failure, attendance, being a great, substance abuse. All of our preventive programs could be funded in a way that you would then define a population and then serve it with these funds to help them not be academically behind because of those other factors that aren't related to assessments.
And so is this is ongoing funding specifically for these students?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it's distributed by formula.
By formula,
Yep.
okay,
And to every LEA.
okay. They have to apply for it, or it's just?
Nope, it's an
distributed
MSP. It's
on
a
top of the-
flow through.
On top of the, just on
WP.
top of the WP?
Yep.
Okay,
Yes.
that was the sort of bigger question.
Okay.
Is it about $40 million?
44 million this current 1920 year.
Okay, and I'm assuming that LEAs like this opportunity?
It's been well received,
Okay.
yes.
Anyone else have any questions? Board member comments?
Sorry, I'm having a hard time finding it right now, but So there's different appropriation amounts. The appropriation is divided into different chunks. Is that correct?
So in this rule is the distribution formula. Yes, and so the formula on how the money is distributed is that like the first portion goes to high poverty schools, and then there are six criterion that students may be counted in. Is that?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so can you explain to me how this LEA definition fits into these criteria, or is it a separate chunk of the money?
We haven't changed the distribution formula. So what we're looking at is now how would you define the target population to be served by the funds? Because it's never, the use of the funds was never connected to the distribution of the funds.
Thank you for
Yeah.
that
Does that make sense?
clarification. Yes, thank you.
Okay. Other questions? Were there any individuals in the audience who wanted to speak to R277-708? Doesn't have the sex appeal that some do, but sorry, Brian.
I know.
No pun intended.
Don't listen to
Oh,
her,
wait.
Brian.
That's standards of assessment. Never mind.
Yeah, we don't do that here.
Okay.
Can I make one comment?
Yes, go ahead.
Just this rule is about 4 years, been about 4 years since it was continued. The committee may want to consider continuing this as well as amending it at the same time so that we don't have to bring it back right away.
In a year. Would anybody like to make a motion? Board Member Davis, thank you.
I move that the committee continue and approve R277-708 Draft 1 on first reading and forward to the board. Can't read the rest of my thing, but
For continuation.
for
and final
continuation
reading.
and final reading.
Great. The motion is that the committee approve R277-708.
Continue and approve.
And the motion is that the committee approve and continue R277-708 or recommend approving and continuing R277-708 to the board for continuation and for final reading. All in favor? Aye. Nobody's opposed. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
That was great.
Thank you.
We appreciate that. I had some kind of big conceptual questions and you answered those, so thank you. Okay, we have our other time certain item, which is a discussion of oops, I just turned my microphone off. Discussion of R277, item number 9.8, and it is item number R277-613. We have a rule that has been revised many times and commented on many times, and we've brought it back. Most recent comments were some concerns by a couple of, Board Member Hanson specifically, but others as we started talking about it. So now we're looking at draft 5 of R277-613. The appropriate person to discuss that is Colby. Are you the person that's supposed to discuss that?
Do we want to, this board member
Or
Hanson
Scott,
gonna
do you want
present
to
his-
talk about what the concerns were you had? This is Board Member Hanson, Scott Hanson.
Scott Hanson.
Yep,
Yes,
you're
okay. Scott Hanson, board member from District 2. Initially, the reason I believe this came before the committee was for revisions to comply with some direction from the Legislative Rules Committee to match definitions in the Utah Code. And I believe that that is an important thing that we should do. Because those definitions, it is important for us to know what's going on in our schools, and without clear definitions, it's hard to understand that. So the motivation behind my revision is to match those definitions up, to provide for clear and accurate, detailed reporting, to provide for proper investigation and compliance with legal requirements. Just as a side note, my actions and my request for revisions and what I'm putting before the board is not motivated by anyone other than myself. I have no affiliations to outside entities. I just think that it's important that we clean this up so that we can get our most vulnerable kids, the ones who are victims of bullying and this type of behavior, the help that they need. And to do that, we need to know what's happening. in our schools. The draft 5 that's before you, do you want me to talk about the details of that?
Please. Make sure everybody's looking at the top and and we've had so many drafts of this, make sure anyone who's listening or in the audience is looking at draft 5 so that we're understanding the same draft.
Let me say this as well. There was a draft 4 that was on the website under my name. It represented a half of an effort to split this rule into 2, one dealing just with bullying and another companion rule which would have dealt with the civil rights and discrimination and that sort of thing. After consulting with some committee members and other folks on the board, I think it makes more sense and is easy to understand if that's all combined in one rule. So this is one rule. The issue with splitting it into 2 is if those don't proceed in parallel, it's very difficult to know where everything comes out. And so that probably created to some confusion by just having half of that proposal before the board. So the draft 5 that you're looking at, if you look at lines 36 and 37, removes the addition to the bullying definition that the Legislative Rules Committee asked us to get rid of. That's 36 and 37. Lines 44 through 47 include civil rights language. In our definition of civil rights violation, it actually cites to the code.
That's not new, it was just hyperlinked, that's what it's.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's the hyperlinks that came through. Okay.
That must
That's
make 'em blue.
that's not my
Makes them blue.
ad, but that's, and then the additions that I'm talking
Are
about.
on line 1.
Yeah, we're getting down to lines
Get rid of line
140, I think.
Yeah, get rid of.
This is, we had kind of an expanded definition with some examples of aggression and bullying, which I believe the consensus is, in my opinion, is that these don't add anything to the rule. The training would include, if we go to A, which is on 150, the training would be comprehensive training to include both bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, and retaliation. The training would also include discrimination under the laws that have been cited. It would also include C, and this is an add, how bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, and retaliation are different from discrimination and may occur separately from each other or in combination. I think this is important because we do have basic schoolyard aggression, which could be a simple fight because 2 kids got mad at each other, one of them stepped on the other's foot or something. There could be another instance that is something that fits under the definition of bullying. There could be bullying that is bullying, but is also discriminatory harassment. And so we would check 2 boxes there and report it both ways. And I think it's important for our administrators to understand how that fits, how aggressive acts fit along that continuum. Next. If we go to line 233, this is an add that the LEA should adopt a policy outlining under what circumstances the LEA will investigate and report instances of bullying, cyberbullying, and retaliation as civil rights violations. So this helps the LEA to understand that reporting piece, which boxes need to be checked and how does that reporting need to be done. An additional add is, let me see, there's another one here.
242.
259 is what I'm looking at. Do we have something on 242?
yes.
Brenda?
We had the clarification on 242 that a victim of bullying is not required to participate in restorative justice.
Okay, and that restorative justice would have the victim and the bully kind of interfacing with one another, and that's usually not a good idea in this case. So there's an exception there. But then we get to line 259, which this is in our reporting section. And instead of reporting just the number of incidents under each of these federal laws, the number and type. So we're looking for more information there. There's also in line 265 the number and type of incidents that occur, which include a student who is bullied, cyberbullying based on these actual and perceived characteristics, disability, race, national origin, religion, sex, gender identity, and sexual orientation. So just looking again for more information there so that we can understand what's happening in our schools and deal with it properly. I think that those are my main points. If you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to address them. But to help our kids not only feel safe, but be safe in our schools, I think this is important. And I think having those definitions aligned is an important thing that we should do.
Thank you. Any questions for anyone? I mean, it could be Scott, who's proposing these amendments, or it could be Ben, who helped with the rule, or it could be Corby, there you are. I was just looking for you, but who initially helped with the rule. Anybody have any questions on the committee? What?
I do.
Okay. Oh, Cindy, thank you.
Just double checking to make sure I'm thinking the specific actions that are taken out, like punching someone, that's taken out because in the training, the training will include when that equals bullying and when it progresses to discrimination or harassment or something else. Is that
Yes.
why because it's not always cut and dry for one action?
That is correct. And we do have a pretty extensive definition of bullying in the code. So that's 53G 9601. So it talks about if these things are present, then it's bullying. And those are the examples that the trainer is going to be using. They're going to say, here's a schoolyard fight. Here's something that happens in the hall. Here's.
Right. Does that help? Great. I don't know when the proposal.
I think if I can just add one more thing, I think we may limit ourselves by starting to state specific examples because the trainer is much more wide open to be able to deal with questions and deal with different scenarios.
And it is primarily, I think it's important to emphasize that this rule is primarily about, it is about the policy that LEAs have, but it is primarily about what the training looks like that LEAs will provide. Board Member Cummins?
I just want to thank Board Member Hanson for bringing these amendments to our attention, but also working through some misunderstandings that have taken place as the intent of these amendments and listening to those who had concerns and really working through this process. So thank you, Board Member Hanson, for your patience through this process and bringing this forward.
No, thank you. I think that's what we sign up for when we come to sit on the board.
And we've got another board member who wanted to offer a small amendment, and I think she'd like to do it herself, so you texting her? So we're going to wait for that. I had an amendment that I wanted to propose that I think is pretty minor also, on lines, keeping in mind that this is about the training and also consistency throughout the rule. On lines 154, lines 156, and lines 159, I wanted to do what we did earlier in the section of the rule and just say Title VI of the Civil Rights Amendment of 1964 and eliminate the descriptive language afterwards. Same on line 156, same on line 159, because the descriptors are A, not necessary, and B, they're not necessarily all-inclusive of everything that is in those particular regulations. So that's sort of a non-substantive. Okay, lines 1, I'm looking at lines 154, line 156, and line 159. And what I would delete is only the descriptors at the end.
Everything after.
Including, because the regulations stand for themselves without singling out one piece of it. It's also consistent with the earlier section where we did the same thing. Board Member Mike.
I have a question. On line 1 and 2, it states, on 2, it states that it's a LEA disruptive student behavior in the title.
I'm struggling to find where you are.
Just at the very top. The title.
Oh.
The title of the
Oh, the title of the rule. Okay.
LEA disruptive student behavior. But down on 164, we bring in employee. And then
Right.
again on 171. So is that?
Is that accidental or on purpose, or is that
Exactly.
interesting? Let me try that, and then Angie can speak to that too. There was a bill that was passed last year by Representative Stratton that that prohibited abusive conduct specifically toward an employee. And it was pretty much as simple as that. So rather than having a separate rule to prohibit essentially bullying of an employee, we were looking for a way to incorporate it in this rule. But that makes maybe not an exactly perfect
Students or employees.
title.
Well,
Go ahead. Angie, do you want to add to that?
Yes,
Or
please.
change that?
So the part that relates to employees, though, is really the abusive conduct policies, but you did mention that there's a part, is it 164?
164 and 171 cites employees.
Has it employee word in it?
And I think, and I could, if Corby was here, he could probably help.
Corby's
There
here.
is a different section in the code that talks about disruptive student behavior.
Right.
So that's kind of a category, but then bullying is another, abusive conduct is another. So I don't know that we'd want to say LEA disruptive employee behavior, because I don't know that that's the intent, but
It's not
I'm
the
just-
full.
Does this rule
Maybe-
really talk
maybe
about
we
the
could
disruptive
take-
I
student
think
behavior?
I think we ended up taking disruptive
take it
out of
out?
it.
Okay.
I think you could take that part out of the title.
Scott, would you like to add to that?
And I think bullying in the statute is defined as a school employee or student intentionally committing, and I think when we're up to LEA disruptive student behavior, comma, bullying, and then bullying is what brings in the employees.
Right.
We
Okay.
use that in the title.
But I'm trying to decide if disruptive
I
means.
think you could take that out.
I don't know, what do you think, Corby?
Corby.
Could we take that out of the title, or is it necessary?
Yeah, Corby Easton, Provincial Specialist here at Utah State Board of Education. I think it's okay to take it out of the title because it's in another part of Utah code. It's on the like grounds of suspension, and so it's fine. And that's we more on like 609. And so
It more applies to that other rule.
yes,
So it would, then the title would read bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, retaliation, abuse, well, we've got abusive conduct, policy and training. Would that be right? Would that be accurate?
LEA bullying.
LEA bullying, well, it's not exactly LEA bullying, but.
Well, it's their policies and training. It's their policies and training.
Yeah, exactly. We probably bully LEAs more than they bully some.
And just move LEA to between
So maybe it should
conduct
be
and policies.
LEA policies regarding bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, retaliation, and abusive conduct training. Or, I don't know. Somebody else want to try
I-
a title?
LEA policies and training on bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, et cetera.
Regarding, does that suit you, Mike?
I think that sounds fair. Say it again, Ben.
Brittany?
LEA policies on training regarding.
And I'd say
bullying, et
regarding
cetera.
rather than on, but
Yeah.
other than that, LEA policies and training regarding bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, retaliation, and abusive conduct. Now,
Just
board
a
member.
nitpicky question then, because there's responsibilities for the superintendent here, and so if we use just like LEA policies,
The-
does that matter?
The title doesn't really have any impact on.
Doesn't have any legal
The substance
impact.
of the rule is what really is the law.
The reason I do care about titles, and I think maybe this is a Mike approach too, is when someone's looking for information, looking at the title of the rule is what you start with. So
Absolutely.
it's helpful if
That's-
it informs accurately.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
you want to try, Angie?
That's great.
Well, I was just going to say, you could just take out LEA also and just have the title be policies and training regarding bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, retaliation, and abusive conduct.
That suits me. Does that seem okay?
What do
to
you think, Ben?
Could there be any
Took out-
confusion with that?
You might just take out policies and training and just call it bullying, cyberbullying, hazing.
And
We don't want to make it more confusing.
I think I kind of like the idea that this is about training. That's where we got really
Okay.
confounded earlier on, was this is primarily about what your training looks like, and then that you must have a policy. So I think going with Angie, you want to repeat that again, Angie?
And Board Member Hanson, is he okay with that?
Board Member Scott, are you still?
That's part
Okay,
of the
he likes
policies.
As a non-voting voice.
Well,
So the motion could be to amend the title of the rule to policies and training regarding bullying, cyberbullying, hazing, retaliation, and abusive conduct.
great, that sounds better, more informative, thank you.
Do you want to
Okay.
make that motion and have somebody?
Yeah, do you have to make a motion?
Brittany just
to
said
pass?
so
Yeah.
moved.
So
That's
moved
great.
without objection.
Thank you, Angie.
Okay.
great.
There's the title changed. Now, let's speak, so you guys can stay or go, whatever you want. We're good.
Okay.
So I know there are some people in the audience who'd like to speak to this. Oh, Jennifer, you're here, Jenny. We have one more amendment before we have the audience speak, then you can speak to all of the pieces.
Okay, so,
And this is posted on Civic Clerk.
Right, that's Earl amendment.
yes, and I still think it's not I don't think it's the Roman numeral. I actually think it's capital E, because it's a listing of all the things under there. If you want to just double check that, under 53G 9605, number 6.
And it is on line 171, right, in the rule?
Yes, that's where it would go.
So we can either do it so that it's the training shall emphasize this, or if you want it
Either
to
way.
include information on, then we could put it under, we would put it on line 166 or 160, and we could call it E.
Okay, either, I think prefer E. Just so it's,
Okay, so you want to explain what your amendment is?
Yeah, it's
please?
just simply, it's outlining what's already listed in the law, just an emphasis that the rights of school employee, parent, or student to exercise the right of free speech in accordance with subsection, and then it lists the subsection for that.
Right.
So it's just a simple.
So anybody, Brittany, would you have questions about that?
Yeah. Just question about the use of the word emphasize. So
That wouldn't be there if we put E. So she's suggesting we move it up to line 166 and make it subparagraph capital E. And the way that would be wording, it would just be the rights of a school employee.
And the rest of it.
Okay, sorry, say that, the rights of the school
It would start-
employee, so we wouldn't have the word emphasize?
Yeah,
That's
we
right.
just
Because
start
that
with-
was my only concern is.
The rights of a
Okay.
school employee, parent, or student to exercise the right of freedom, the free speech.
166, after 166.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Exercise freedom.
That made sense. So it'd just be a listing underneath there. Yeah, so after 166. Does that make sense?
Okay. So any questions about that? Do you want to speak to that, Jenny? Why, what you like about it, or why you
Well, I just think
sought the
we've
amendment?
emphasized all the other elements that are listed in that particular section, and just including that continues with that same, in that same vein of putting those items on there, so.
Okay. Other?
Okay.
It doesn't trouble me. I'm looking for any.
Cindy is asking a question there.
That's right. I'm just looking for a minute I'm just processing this.
I have a question while you're processing.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
Cindy.
It feels a little weird to me writing about putting free speech in here when free speech obviously is already protected and under law. But what you're saying is that in state bullying code, everything that's listed there, we've included in our rule except this
Yes,
piece.
that's
So
what I'm
we're
trying to
not
say.
congruent.
Yeah, as I went back and analyzed through that, this is the one that's missing, so, which is the last item, so. Under that
Okay.
section.
Is that and I'm not looking at the code at the same time, does it say the right of free speech? Or
I will look
That's
at
the
it.
exact,
That's
that's
the-
verbatim
Okay,
from the
because
code.
that feels a little awkward, that wording, but if it's.
Well,
from
it's
the-
even more extensive than that, that's a
But if it's from the
simplification.
code, then I'll live with
Yeah.
it. Okay, all right. All right, Brittany, do you have another question, another thought?
Sorry, I'm just trying to figure out maybe the best placing for this, because it's a training, and everything else listed, as far as I can see, sorry, I keep getting lost
Me
in
too.
where the A's begin.
Me too.
But there, it's talking about all of the kind of the negative sides of it, right? Bullying, hazing, what these things look like. And then we list,
Shall
all the
include
things that
information
could
on
be bullied for,
bullying.
but then all of a sudden come back to the rights
Bullying.
for free speech. Anyway, I'm okay with it. I just curious. Anyway, sorry, I'm just.
It does feel a little, but I guess it feels a little out of context or out of place, but I Can't see a better
Other than
place.
it fitting in with the law itself, it is included there and it is part of that.
Because it is the training, and we're going back to 139, that's where it follows from, is that right?
Yes.
Exercise the right of free speech. That's what I thought was, I thought you just exercise freedom of speech or free expression. Freedom of expression, doesn't that seem more? But that's right, I don't want to go beyond what it says. All right, so I'm trying to follow from line 139 where it says,
Do you want me to read the full part in the law?
no,
Is that
no,
what-
no,
okay,
I'm
okay.
fine with that.
Okay.
The training, I'm just trying to figure out in a
Yeah.
context now. The training described in subsection 5A shall. and this
Include
is
information
include
on.
information on, and then we go through bullying in big A, and big B is discrimination, and then C is how bullying, cyberbullying are different from each other, and then D is bullying, cyberbullying based on the students' or employees' actual or perceived characteristics, being a little more specific, and then this E would say the rights of a school employee, parent, or student to exercise the right of free speech, consistent with blah, blah, blah. So, Brittany.
So now that I've got that flow in my head, can I ask then a question of, are we looking to differentiate the difference between words that are said that might be interpreted as bullying and words that fall under the ability of free speech? And as an LEA tries to incorporate this into training, do we have case law examples for an LEA to say what is that differentiation point between bullying and free speech? Where does free speech end and bullying begin? And so my question is if we're going to require this to be in a policy, where would that differentiating point be given, or that help? Do we?
Is that a question directed to Jenny, or?
I think it needs to be part of the dialogue, is making sure that's part of the dialogue. I was just looking down because I had misread the direction. I don't know if it does fit better, but it still is under it would still, I think it needs to fall under part of the training or awareness of. So.
Can I follow up, Chair? I'll go ahead and follow up. So I recognize, after reading it again, I think it flows fine as part of the training. My question, though, is that if we're just putting a line in there that an LEA needs to incorporate this in their training, but where would they find that resource? Does it exist? Is there a resource that exists that helps them to define what that friction point is between bullying and free speech?
I can explain I can give you a benefit of my experience. Yes, there are cases. There are not dispositive cases that I know of that draw a bright line between free speech and bullying, but there are cases that address, it's similar to the cases that address that free speech is not obscene, that obscene language is not protected by free speech. And there's that case law might be able to be used by analogy. There are other cases that explain that there's some Supreme Court cases that talk about student free speech where the court said, no, that's not okay. Your freedom of speech is not as great as another's right to not be, to not hear inappropriate language. So there are similar kind of court cases that a LEA could use to say, here are examples of where free speech ends and bullying begins, or the use of inappropriate language begins. They kind of are lumped together. So that's where they'd find their resources.
So can I, just
Sure,
final
please.
question, I promise. Sure. Then would this be up to LEAs to kind of create that line of here's how we're training our employees to say, okay, this isn't a bullying incident, this is a student exercising their free speech?
So correct me if I'm wrong, the State Board of Education would also be assisting them in that. Is that accurate?
Well, Corby has, I can speak to the fact that Corby has a model bullying policy that he's developed, and it's probably language that you could add to the bullying policy, right?
It's already in there
So it's in our model policy.
It's in the model policy to be, that's a much more concise answer than I gave you.
I'm just saying, I think you're right. To have a variety of LEAs coming up with their own thing would not be,
But the truth is, there's not a bright line test. So
No,
some
there's not.
LEA might say, we're in our school, we're not going to allow that kind of language. And then it would be up to the parents to maybe object or work with them or whatever.
yeah.
So, Corby, do you want to add something?
Yes, Corey Easton, Utah State Board of Education Prevention Specialist. I just want to make the board aware that I heard from an educator. He experienced a racial slur towards him, and he was told by his superior the kid was exercising his First Amendment right. And so I just fear the muddy waterness.
If that's a word.
Yeah. And so we just be aware of.
I think creating the balance there and understanding of what, and there's not, you're right, there's not a clear cut, but there is enough to go on to help direct or provide some inform in some ways.
Go ahead, Angie. Why don't you just suggest, here's another idea.
Okay.
So just another idea I have is we could model in the rule the exact same language that you have in the code, which is instead of requiring training on free speech, because that's a pretty big, people who have those experience in free speech, that's a lot to know the case law on. But you could maybe add at the end of the rule, nothing in this part is intended to infringe upon the right of a school employee, parent, or student to exercise the right of free speech. So it's a little different than providing training on those rights versus bullying prevention. It's just an
So where are
idea.
you suggesting
At the
that?
very end
I
of
was
the rule.
thinking it, let me look real quick.
Would that just be its own section at the very end?
Yeah. After line 291.
But I do think
You wanna-
it doesn't want it just sat there. Do you know what I mean? I do think there needs to be some dialogue about it as well, not just put at the end just as a side note. It needs to be either in a module or something, at least some awareness of it and where that line is, or currently where we know. Because that's always developing.
So
correct?
your druthers would be to keep the amendment where it is now. So we have the amendment proposed at line 166. And let's repeat that. And let's get the amendment, and then I'd love to hear from the public, because you'll have the full picture to comment to. So it will be a new, after line 166 in the rule, a new capital E, and that is now on the screen, that's perfect. That will read, the rights, this is, the training shall include the rights of a school employee, parent, or student to exercise the right of free speech in accordance with subsection 15, you can read the subsection. Here's my slight reservation. I just want to voice it. I don't know that I would object to the amendment on this basis, but free speech rights in schools are different for employees and for students, and parents, they're significantly different in a school setting. So I would not want to imply from this amendment that they're all equal. Free speech rights are not all equal for these different categories in schools. So I don't know if that.
Doesn't that almost speak to the training or the need for training for that very reason?
Yeah, I'm just
Yeah,
I'm
you're
thinking
thinking out
maybe it
loud.
should say the differing rights of school employees, or the various rights of school employees, parents, and students. Students have the most protection, then school employees probably, and then parents who aren't really who are there by invitation. So that's the challenge. I wonder if an as appropriate would help. I think a committee member needs to, well, I don't know. What's the rule in this? Can another board member just make this amendment? Or do we need a committee member?
I think you have to be committee members. You could bring it to the board meeting next month. too.
Yes.
Right.
Is there a committee member that wants to make this amendment? Board Member Davis.
I don't know, we're just trying to, so we're wondering if we add onto the amendment, the rights of, well, just shorten that to say, the rights of free speech in accordance with subsection 53G-9-6056, and
Take out
how
the-
it differs for students, employees, and parents.
How does that suit you, Jenny?
That's fine. I do know, well, I wonder if it changes the element of the law. So, but I can see where you'd want for training purposes that to be highlighted. So, yeah, I'm good with that.
Okay. What, Angie, you would be?
I just wonder if you might want to just strike in accordance with 53G.
Okay, because otherwise we're, yeah.
You're conflating.
I just don't know, it doesn't, that subsection does not establish a right to free speech. I feel like that's like a constitutional right. And this is more of a statement saying it's not intended. I just think it's just a little.
So just striking
I don't
the
know.
reference to it?
I apologize, maybe I shouldn't.
No, I appreciate that.
What do you?
We might as well talk about it now rather than next month.
Because it's not that that's giving a right. That subsection isn't providing any
It just
kind of
speaks
right.
to the right.
It says it's not intended to
Right.
infringe on it.
Brittany, would you like to add?
She's got it up there. Yeah, and so that, similar to my question before, so, and I agree with what Angie just pointed out, because if we're citing it, the way we're citing it almost sounds like in accordance with, like, as if that's the definition for free speech, which
Or
it's
where the
not.
right comes from.
And that, because that's the same language we use in accordance with, right, to turn back and define something. And so I would be hesitant to do that. And so, once again, even as, I do think if we were to take out the citing and just talk about free speech, because that's defined in the U.S. Constitution, not anywhere in state law, that I'm not a lawyer, I don't know, anyways. But once again, my question comes back to it and how it differs for students, employees, and parents. Is there resources available to help LEAs to recognize those differences? And I agree that this training could be is beneficial to these people. But I just want to make sure that before we put it in rule, that we are confident there are resources available to LEAs to help with those definitions of what free speech is and how it's differentiated for these different
Corby
populations.
just showed me that there's resources in our model policy that talk about this issue.
That good for you?
Does it
Not-
cover the
It probably doesn't
differentiation?
cover the differentiation.
It's like,
It probably cites cases that do, though?
yes. Mhm.
Okay. Or cites resources that do. Would you like, Cindy, did you have another question, comment?
We're just trying to find the reference to it in the state law.
Oh, here, I can pull it
Or in
back
the
up
state
again.
In
constitution.
53
Yep,
Yeah, 53G.
G-9.
9605, it's subsection 6.
It's at the very bottom of 605.
605,
Plus on that. Oh, thank you.
yes.
So we either need, oh, Corby, do you have something to add?
Yes, so with Board Member Hanson change of just providing training on bullying, cyberbullying, this will already be covered since it's already in statute. Is that correct?
That's true. That's true. Because training is on this statute.
Yes.
And this piece is part of and this concern is part of the statute. The training would automatically be included in that training.
Yes.
Is what you're saying, I think. Don't want to put words in your mouth if you're not. Okay.
That is
All
correct.
right. What he said. Additional, would a board member like to make an amendment? Would like to make an amendment to incorporate this? What's your thinking? I don't want to put anybody on the spot.
Go for it.
Brittany, or you're pointing. Board member
Just, yeah,
comments?
so I'll move that we amend the rule and add after line 166, section E, the right of free speech and how it differs for students, employees, and parents.
Yes. Okay, understanding it's about bullying in a school setting, and we won't repeat all that. Right.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, so the motion is to add a new parentheses E at line 166 that says the right of free speech.
Sorry.
It's all right.
I keep.
The right of free speech.
There we go.
And how it differs for students, employees, and parents. And
can I speak
yes.
to it?
You want to speak to that,
So,
please?
so I'm willing to support this. I don't love it, however. The law, the piece of code that we're referencing gives us the code, and it tells us as a board to write rules regarding bullying and all these things. And they make the clarification that we, as the legislature, are not trying to infringe on free speech. I don't know that it's necessary for us to include this as part of, here, you need to address this, and this in your rule, because I don't think that's what they meant by that final statement to have this included. However,
good point.
I do think that it is important for employees to recognize that from both sides of this perspective, that it's not just a right to be able to say what I want, but also for students, employees, and parents to recognize that sometimes you can't say everything that you want, and that sometimes what we think is our free speech is not, we don't have the right to say certain things under the guise of free speech. And so I do think this training will be very valuable if we recognize it for what it can be, to really inform students, employees, and parents that there are things that can be said. This isn't an infringement on your free speech, but you cannot say anything you want based on free speech.
That's the way I agree with that very much. Thank you. In fact, looking at this now, I'm not going to try and amend this again because it'll take us another 15 minutes, but I would probably like to say the right of free speech and its limitations for students, employees, and parents, but we'll leave it for now. And we have people in the audience who'd like to speak to this. So the motion before us is that we would add parentheses E, and I already said this once, as it's written on the board, the right of free speech and how it differs for students, employees, and parents. All in favor of the amendment? You have additional comments? No. Aye. Okay. Oh, so all in favor? Aye is written. All. Okay. All. Any? I did. Any opposed? Any opposed?
Can I speak to Carol's and just just putting the limitation in
my
there?
Pretend.
Yeah, no,
pretend
because
amendment?
the concern with the limitation is that the intent here, and we're trying to differentiate between in this and adding more to it, but the infringe would suggest the opposite of limitation. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I mean, yes, and out of context, but discussion for another day.
Okay,
I'm not going to
okay,
make
okay.
the amendment. That's my concern, is I think, to Brittany's point, that it's a two-edged sword. So, once more, all in favor of the amendment is stated now 3 times. All in favor? Opposed? Yes, it passes. Thank you. It does pass. Yes. Yes, it passes unanimously. Thank you, Jenny. We have people in the audience who'd like to speak. Now we're back to discussing the rule as a whole, as amended. This amendment, the amendment that I proposed and passed that had to do with deleting the including language. There was no vote on that? Oh, I'm sorry. I guess we need to also vote on, I just assumed because I made it, that it would be, that it would be perfect. All right, on lines 150, 154, line 156, 159, I'll make the amendment that we delete the including language on, again, lines 154, 156, 159, to be consistent with the earlier section. All in favor? Aye. Work with me here. All right, back to considering the rule as a whole. Just the including language. Is that okay? That's fine. Okay. All right, now we get for the moment of truth. We'd like to hear from the public, and we had people signed up, I think. No, we don't. You did sign up? Where's my paper that says that?
Yes.
Yes, and we voted on the title change, which isn't really a legal part of the rule anyway. Yeah. Oh, there's a hand in the back. Okay, let's just start. I do not have the list of people who signed up. We went to all that effort. I'm sorry. Why do I not? Am I missing? I'm missing that page. Okay. Let's see. Let's tell a person online then. So, Michelle, would you like to come forward and speak, and we'll stop fussing about where my list is? Please, and introduce yourself.
My name is Michelle Dininger. I live in Park City. I appreciate all the communication that I've had with various board members through emails and telephone calls, and I just had one more thing to add to think about as this has evolved over the past few weeks. So I wrote this down to read. It's not that long. I timed it.
Great.
Okay. My 10th grader got in a kid's face in health class last semester because the kid, who's known for making homophobic remarks, was claiming only gay people can get AIDS. It got heated, and the teacher intervened and corrected the misconception, which is obviously pretty fortunate for the kid and his future partners. Also this year, in theater, the student stage manager began meetings by saying, "Good afternoon, ladies and Apache helicopters," in reference to a popular meme that said, if people can change genders, then the meme creator could become an Apache helicopter. Just his way of ridiculing and denying the reality of the 3 trans kids at the meetings. Nobody laughed, and nobody escalated it to the adult manager. Those anecdotes are not bullying, and they would never be reported. They're just a glimpse of life inside progressive Park City High School. 2 recent personal examples of microaggressions that LGBTQ people deal with every single day. The constant affronts to their value as humans, the ridicule and the disinformation are a weight on them that contributes to their statistically troubling outcomes. In my phone conversation with Scott Hansen, he mentioned a couple times that he was looking forward to having data direct where money and programs go in the future. That caught my ear because after my op-ed ran in the Tribune, a man commented on their website, quoting 2019 Sharp survey data. He said, reporting incidents of bullying based on gender were 0.4% in our district, so it probably wasn't as big an issue as people thought. Therefore, training wasn't needed. That comment, to me, seeks to use data to drive policy away from LGBTQ kids and families. As you all know, because of the flap, at Trailside Elementary School, teachers requested inclusive training due to severity, not frequency. Students from 2 families at that school repeatedly called others faggots and used other slurs, and teachers did not know how to handle it in a way that would not get them in trouble. They asked for guidance, and they got it. Then 2 anonymous Trailside families, I wonder which 2, opposed the training for religious reasons because it accepted LGBTQ people. Those families apparently were more comfortable with ostracizing and threatening negative outcomes than of increasing acceptance. Change can be scary, and people who look or behave differently from what is familiar can be disconcerting until people get used to it. I think you are all doing what you can in a tough situation. I appreciate that. As you hammer this out, bear in mind that with something this intensely personal and controversial, it's impossible for data to tell the full story of what's happening. So for that reason, don't create a rule that can use data against LGBTQ kids and families or teachers, or make their challenges seem too statistically insignificant to warrant attention and resources. Their situations will always be underreported out of fear, prejudice, and existing law. For example, I have a friend who is a trans parent with kids in the school district. The kids know their parents' truth. The school community does not, because that parent cannot come out because of the family's insurance. So those kids are in an LGBTQ family that will never show up in any data collection, and there are more families like that than any of us will ever know. Okay, that's it.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Other people who'd like to comment? Was anybody else signed up that I missed? I just wanted to get those people first because okay, please come forward. And I wish I knew your name to say that.
It's okay. Hi, Chelsea Acosta, middle school teacher at Glendale. Sorry I'm late, but the bell rang at 3:02. So it's a little hard to get here for teachers and youth. I mean, I'm just going to ask.
Totally, we're glad you're here.
Thank
we don't
you.
Throw at time.
So I just wanted to reiterate, so I teach middle school health, and I'm very much active. I'm also on the board of the ACLU. I teach at the Pride Center on Tuesday nights to parents of LGBTQ, transgender youth. Also support the NAACP and all the groups that I feel like are extremely impacted when this language was originally removed from it. This week is actually the Black Lives Matter in School campaign across the nation. And I just wanted to say thank you. I've been trying to teach and chaperone a Valentine's dance in middle school, which is always a lot of fun.
That's what hell will be like.
Right? Similar. I think similar, yes. But on the way here, I was trying to follow and text and get here. And so I want to say that I appreciate that you put the language back in. I think when you take language out, language matters. We teach our youth that. And also, it kind of was slipping back into that colorblind approach where if we remove things, I know back in the days that was because we were trying to be inclusive, but now we want to see things and we want to see people's struggles and make sure that those groups of individuals and communities are being protected. So I appreciate you putting the language back in. And from someone that knows the suicide rates for trans youth, especially in our district, my heart goes out to you, and I know that there'll be a lot of parents and youth that will feel heard and seen today. So I appreciate you putting the language back in.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comment and your work. Kathleen.
Kathleen Cheshire, Color Country Uniserve Director. Comment, kind of a question. So on line 241, where it talks about an alleged victim is not required to participate in a restorative justice practice, with an individual who alleged to have engaged in prohibited contact. What's a definition of individual? Does this mean only for students, or could it also be employee to employee, since employees are part of this?
Line 241, I can speak to that, and then Angie can add to that if she'd like, but my sort of initial reaction is the restorative justice sort of concept is primarily for students, primarily aimed at students, but I don't see that it would prohibit employees who were asked to participate in a program to say I'd rather not. But
Okay.
Their rights are not exactly the same as students in schools. But
And the reason I ask is because I recently had this happen in one of the counties I work with where, it was employee to employee abusive bullying, over time, and the principal hadn't done anything even though they brought it to their attention. So then the district came in and said, we're going to do restorative justice, and brought them all together, like they had to be there. There was no option. So that's where my concern comes from. So
and legitimate concern, don't know. I think that this, I'm not the legal counsel.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Can I just make a comment?
Yes, please.
In this instance, it's specifically related to bullying, and I apologize, I was trying to look at this, and I'm not
that's
sure if
okay.
you said that the incident that you were referring to was a bullying or incident? Was it? Okay. But it does state here that the, following an investigation, that the restorative justice practices are discretionary. That's what it does say here. And it does say an alleged victim is not required to participate in a restorative justice practice in subsection 7. So that is a good question. I think it would really depend on your LEA's policies and how they determined
the way
that.
this district's policy is written, it sounds like it's for students. It's not clear that it's one way, or includes employees as well.
That would be something I would ask
Okay.
the district to just
All
be
right.
clear about whether it applies to students or,
Okay.
or employees or both.
Okay.
And this requires a policy at the LAA level.
Right.
So that could be clarified in a policy.
Okay, right. And then my other comment, where you changed the title, and the title did have the beginning disruptive student behavior. And so, and I noticed in the whole thing, it really doesn't address disruptive student behavior. So, and I haven't taken time to research, I should have, but I'm just here today. But is there another rule that addresses that? Because here's an example of an email I got yesterday. I have a student in my room this year that causes major disruptions and safety concerns. The last 2 weeks, I've had to have my students evacuate classroom 3 times. This student has wrecked the classroom, threatened to harm others, thrown things across the room. I have had to teach with him kicking bookshelves and throwing objects, tables, pencils, books. I am getting concerned with student safety and learning. What can I do and what are my options? And she has talked with her administrators and things, and the student is a special education student, but we're seeing this so much, so much. So is there another rule that deals with disruptive student behavior?
Yes, it's 609, correct? That's what, yeah. So you can see it right up there on the screen also.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you so much for that.
You've also clearly got to integrate your special ed rules that we talked about just
Right.
previously
Yes,
into that
yes.
too.
So, okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. Other comments from the audience? All right, back to the committee for a motion. Oh, sorry?
There was one
Oh, the
person
person
on-
online.
Oh,
Oh.
oh,
Oh, that was you.
Oh,
That was
okay.
you. Okay.
Great. She made it in person.
Okay.
We had a person who wanted to comment by phone, but she made it, so.
And she was live. So thank you. All right, I think now we're ready for a committee motion if anybody would like to make that motion.
Do you want me to do it?
Yes, please, Cindy.
I recommend that the committee approve R277-613 Draft 5 on first reading and forward to the board for approval on second and final reading.
As amended.
As amended, right, Cindy?
As
and that-
amended.
To restate the motion, the committee moves that we have sent, Board Member Davis moves that the committee approve R277-613 as amended, draft 5, to the board for, we recommend it on first reading and we recommend it to the board on second and final reading. All in favor? Aye. That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you very much to those of you who attended and participated and gave us your ideas, because we very much appreciate them on all rules. We do have one more rule. We do have, don't go away. You guys can go away if you want, but we do have one last rule. Thank you. I would have just let it go. We do have item 9.7, action on R277-419. And I'm getting back there. And to speak to that, we have Sarah. Now look at you speaking to these financial rules. Okay.
Shocking to everyone.
And myself included. Okay, Sarah Young will speak to that.
Thank you so much. So Sarah Young, Director of Strategic Initiatives. So I am excited to come and present this rule with several language changes. I will be really clear at the start of this that the language changes do not actually change any of the mechanisms specific to the way that we distribute money in public education in Utah. So you may ask yourself, why are we doing amendments then? And it is really specific to setting the stage for next steps in 2 counts. The first is specific to personalized learning, which is part of the board's strategic plan. And these changes have been recommended by the Competency-Based Advisory Board here at USBE. The second is also in regards to one of the components of the current USBE funding study that is also looking at components of personalized learning as well as competency in regards to future needs. So by cleaning up the language today, it sets a cleaner stage for us to then be able to look at those mechanisms in regards to these future opportunities for input and reflection on the actual funding elements itself. So to just give you a quick overview of what those changes look like. Or Ben, did you want to do that?
Be my guest.
Okay. I'll just keep going. So all of our changes are really specific to the definitions section, section 2. The first is updating the approved CTE course. We removed in 8 areas of study. That's just a historical error. It doesn't, oh, no.
No?
I'm in 2.
We didn't change that.
We need to remove, pardon me, in the 8 areas of study. It should just be in areas, pathway areas of study.
So that would be an amendment. So you.
My
you
apologies.
delete 8, okay. On line 25. Is that right?
Yeah, so we would delete the S at the end of pathways and then in the 8, and it would go to pathway areas of study.
Okay.
Would be the final read.
In the pathway areas of study. Okay.
Great, thank you. The third element you can see underneath shifts the conversation to attendance validated program. So this is a replacement for the current language which speaks to face-to-face instruction. One of the components that we're seeing as we move into these efforts with blended learning, that it's attendance is the key factor in regards to that mechanism for funding, and that attendance may not be gathered in a specific face-to-face way, and yet is the mechanism by which we count those students. So this verbiage was recommended by the advisory in regards to better capturing the way that we are providing accountability to the funding through attendance validated. Okay. Moving on.
Do you want to see the draft?
Sorry, I have my notes. Oh, my notes. Moving on for blended learning program, we have just provided an updated version of blended that is more reflective of the current field's understanding. Again, this rule was originally written several years ago when we had a limited scope for blended learning. So this is a slightly more expansive in regards to what that looks like, and identifies the online learning where, with some elements of student control over time, place, path, or pace, which again is representative of some of our efforts with personalized learning. And that is blended as well with the supervised brick and mortar component as well. The competency-based learning program, we removed the existing definition and instead are referring to the section of code where competency-based education is defined for the state of Utah so that we have coherence between the code as well as our existing rule. Moving forward, we did eliminate distance learning program only because we already have defined blended and online learning, which is really encompassing of the vision of distance learning. And so those specific elements were just repetitive of the same practice. And then in regards to the face-to-face learning program, again, we had amended that with the attendance validated new definition that was above. Further down, we have now introduced the learner validated program. So learner validated is taking the replacement for the definition that was struck on lines 113 and on in regards to a non-traditional program. This was really important to many of our LEAs who are working in this space of competency and personalized learning. They just felt like being defined as non-traditional was not representative of the current field's experience related to those components. And so moving towards a definition around learner validated provides some of that flexibility in regards to being able to measure student learning based on outcomes as opposed to necessarily through the attendance model. And they just felt like this was more representative of, again, the field's practice. We struck the non-traditional program in regards to removing that in lieu of the learner validated component. And then the rest of the rule, it should be pretty much the same aside from where we...
There's one section that's deleted because you moved that language to R277121. And so that's later on in the rule.
That's the waiver.
That's the waiver of the school
snow
days.
day waiver.
Yeah, we moved it.
So any questions for Sarah or for Ben? Okay. Oh, Brittany.
So my question in the new definition for the learner validated program is the use of the word learner. It almost sounds like, oh, I get to decide my own attendance. Is it meant to be like it's validated by competency or things learned?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we actually had several different kind of ways to categorize that, the advisory board moved forward to superintendency. And looking at all of them, we felt like that one was the most clear. But to your point, if there's a better word in regards to representing, it's those like outcomes that we're trying to capture. That's really the request of the committee in regards to better reflecting the practice.
More?
Just curious about the word outcome.
So
was that part of that conversation?
So it was. So there were two really interesting parts of that conversation, and I'll focus on the second in regards to kind of the LEA's reflection. So one of the challenges with coming up with the two kind of different categories was also recognizing that those two approaches actually share a lot of similarities. And so when we're talking about you're in an attendance validated system, you still do have outcomes in regards to it being a central component of the system. The other part to that conversation that was interesting that I alluded to was that many of our LEAs who are there because of their engagement and competency recognize that they actually fall into the attendance validated. So when we were looking at kind of, innovative, model versus, standard model, many of them were a little dismayed at they're like, well, I would be standard model because that's how we actually do attendance and funding in regards to that, even though they feel their practices are innovative. And so we tried to stay away from any sort of judgment style language, as well as language where we felt like it could be representative of either side. But we're certainly open to suggestions as they occur to the committee.
Other Board Member Davis.
Just to clarify, so we have folks coming to our committee sometimes to request a waiver from the 990 hours and the 180 days. Is this in any conflict of current laws that require that? And if so, how do we navigate or mitigate that? And I also want to know if there's anyone here that's here to speak about this as well.
Okay. You want to speak to that, Sarah?
Yeah, so in regards to the changes, we were very thoughtful about not changing any sections that actually change the essential mechanism itself. Really, all we're trying to do is make sure the vocabulary reflects the current engagement and practices of the field in a way that's not dated to the origins of the rule when some of these pieces were introduced. And so we don't see any conflicts occurring in regards to these updated definitions.
And I guess, just if I can make a comment, I guess I'm kind of still processing learner-validated program. I guess if a better term, and this is, one of the things I didn't say at the outset is this is a rule in progress. And this is just the first discussion of some of the basic changes that will continue. And so if we come up with something that's better than learner-validated program, we could probably revise it at that point, because it doesn't quite do it for me either, but I'll certainly can't think of a better term in the, is it something that's in national literature or other states use, or?
So when it comes to this model of funding, sorry, you heard me kind of laugh slightly. We've actually coordinated with all of the other states who are kind of leaders within this work, and they're looking to Utah to solve that problem.
Oh.
And so,
because we have so little money that it doesn't matter much, right?
well, I think it's honestly one of those pieces when you start talking about the funding mechanisms. It's such a cornerstone of education. It's not a space where you can be like, well, let's try this, and see how it goes. So from that regard, we're trying to be very slow and thoughtful about what that looks like. At the same time, starting to make changes also to demonstrate support for our LEAs that are moving into this space so that they know that we are considering how changing mechanisms of instruction and outcomes may beget changes related to the way we distribute resources.
And so the short answer of that is other states don't have a better term. Okay. Anybody in the audience that wants to speak to this? Great. So, do we have a board member motion? Or do you have more board member comments? No? Board member comments?
I move that we approve R277419 Draft 1 as amended.
We didn't amend that.
No,
we did.
Oh, that little
But there
line.
was no vote. She said, she asked for it.
Oh, I move that we, I move that we approve R277419 Draft 1 with that amendment on line
25.
25. That
That's-
takes away the S and strikes the 8, is that correct?
There's a.
That'll be sufficient.
Okay. On first reading and forward to the board on second and final reading.
Thank you. The motion is that the committee approve R277-419 with the minor amendment and recommend to the board, on first reading, recommend to the board to pass the rule on final reading. On second and final reading. All in favor? Aye. No, that's unanimous, and thank you very much. And thanks, Sarah, very much for that explanation. It's very helpful. Thank you, board members. I think we're finished. I think like 6 minutes late, if my watch is right.
Not
No.
bad at all.
And thanks to all of you who attended and listened to our